Beal from Anaconda.
For start, CSKT.
Valerie Kurth, DNRC.
Norm Johnson, Grand Coors Ranch, DOI.
Stephen Begley, Montana Fish, Life and Parks.
And Mike Paffhausen from Beal.
And I didn't say where I was from, Kristie Beal from Missoula. Jody, who do we have online?
So I do have an external phone number. I have Jessica Benazek
That's
and
DEQ.
Hey everyone,
have-
I'm Jessica.
Yeah, maybe if everyone online could please introduce yourself, that would be great.
Perfect. I'm Jessica Banaszak. I work for DEQ and I am filling in for Katie Garson-Forba.
Is that the only person we have online? Okay, could the rest of you please introduce yourselves?
My name is Mark Murphy, and I'm interested in hearing about the Blacktail Creek project update.
Thank you, Mark. Where are you from?
I represent the Butte Country Club. I'm on the board of directors.
Thank you, Mark.
And I'm Elizabeth Erickson with the BNRC, chair of the BNRC Council. So I'm interested also in the Blacktail Creek project.
Do we have any more than 3 people online?
You have a Dan's note taker and Catherine from NRDP.
Okay.
and I also have a Mary Rose Morgo.
So, because if you're online, could you please introduce yourself? We know there's more than the 3 that have introduced themselves.
Hello, this is Mary Rose Morjo. I'm a first timer to your meetings. I'm from Confederated Sage Kitty Tribes Natural Resource Department. Just kind of interested in what you guys all have going on and wanted to listen in. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. Anyone else? 2 others, is that right?
And
Could the person identified as Dan's note taker please introduce yourself?
and replace the Brian Chapin.
Yeah, hi, my name is Brian Chapin. I'm the executive director of the Clark Fork Coalition.
Okay, we have everybody? Okay. Sounds like we do. Doug, take it away.
Doug Martin with the National Resource Damage Program. As you guys can tell, this is a hybrid meeting and it's being recorded. And we do ask everybody, prior to speaking, if you'd please state your name, so that's on the record, so we know who's talking. And the same thing for folks in the audience. If you do have questions as we go through this, we would like you to be addressed by Kristie, and then we'll take your question. Quick agenda. I think everybody has the agenda in the meeting overview. Initially, we are going to be doing the first hour a kind of a training session to refresh everybody's refresh everybody on how we select projects. When we did the original orientation for this council, we threw a lot at you. This is going to focus on what the advisory council's role is and what the program does, working with partners to select projects and get projects. We do want that to be an interactive thing. Myself and Brian will be doing the presentation on that. So as we move forward, as we move through with that, if you would please just raise your hand, and if you have a question or something we're going over, because there's quite a bit of information. Following that, we'll take a short break, and we will talk about the Blacktail Creek project that we talked about. We presented to you last fall. You assigned us some tasks to do to go look for matching funds. Jim Ford will give an update of where we are on that project and our proposal to move forward. At that point, we will adjourn the formal meeting here. Hopefully it's around 3 o'clock. And then those that are interested, we can gather up and head little bit south of Deer Lodge to go to a couple of the projects that are being implemented just south of Deer Lodge on the Clark Fork River. And depending on how much time we have, potentially further south on Warm Springs. With that, we'll kick right into the training aspect or the orientation aspect of this again. The way we've broken it up, we're going to talk a little bit about the background, some of the information and how we established the restoration plans. And we're going to talk about, where the projects are located and how they came to be located in those locations, what project actions or restoration actions that we are implementing and why, how we select projects, and then Brian's actually going to dig into the project implementation. How do we go out and implement the projects, and what are some of the steps that we take there? Throughout the presentation, we will be talking about how we use the natural resource damage criteria, the Department of Interior criteria, this to help us evaluate the projects and especially within the natural resource provisions. Specifically, a lot of the three criteria that we use the most, technically feasible, is the project that we're looking at. Is it technically feasible to put on the ground? Is it cost effective? And what is the cost benefit? How best are we going to meet the goals of the restoration plan? So these are the criteria that we use. And you guys have all seen these before. They're in the restoration plans. And we do an evaluation of these. We do have a checklist that we go through. We've started going through more precisely now. But we look at technical feasibility, cost effectiveness, the relationship of cost to benefit, the results of response action. This criteria is most applicable, for instance, on the project that we'll go visit after this meeting. Those are projects that are located on the Clark Fork River main stem where DEQ is implementing the remedy. What we don't want to do is we don't want to build a project and then have remediation come through and tear it out. So the results of response action are looking at those types of things. How does it integrate?
Oh, yeah.
Hang on one second, this is Christine.
Into the county sheriff.
One of the persons on the online, can you please mute yourself? Because we can hear your conversation. Thank you.
And then the adverse environmental impacts and human health and safety. We do a kind of our own little NEPA analysis for each project. The response, the recovery period, this to me is a really important one. A lot of the money that we spend or a lot of the projects that we do, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help the natural resources recover faster than they would if you were just to let Mother Nature do it by itself. But by going out and removing tailings is going to do a much faster job of restoring that area than letting those tailings erode slowly over time. And then an important part of all the restoration stuff is that we are responsible for getting permits and following all the policies and rules. We are not exempt. DEQ, EPA, ARCO, under the Superfund provisions, are exempt from applying for permits. They have to comply with all the permits, but under the restoration, we have to apply for the permits. So if we're working in a floodplain, we have to apply for that floodplain permit. We have to work with the floodplain coordinators in the counties in the areas that they're going. So that's how we use the criteria. So a little bit of the background of how how we got to where we were. And I know that Mick couldn't be here today. He had a doctor's appointment. But Mick was in that advisory council group that was around in 2010 and 2011 and 12. They were the advisory council group that helped develop the process plan and the long range plan for how the restoration plans were put together. And I did send those. I sent you links in the cover letter for this meeting to those two documents, and specifically some sections in those that talked about how we would move forward. The long-range plan is a document that all of the advisory councils that members at that time signed, and that provided the guidance of how we were going to develop the process plan and the restoration plan, or the restoration. The process plan actually lays out a lot of the basic rules that what we follow. It provides us instructions on, is that your way?
Yeah, it's just fine. I
It
can
is-
chair, but thank you.
It provides us the guidance on how we deal with our administrative fees, how you guys are selected for the board and that. So to put this in a little timeline, 2011, the long range plan, the process plan were developed. In 2012, using those guidance documents, we allocated the $117 million that was available to the injured resources. That was aquatics, terrestrial, and groundwater. And then we developed the comprehensive restoration plan. And that's the document, the one on the right, that we're working with today. And that's the one that you guys approved or recommended to the governor in 2023. So that's where we are. So these documents it earlier gave us the guidance. We're not going to talk a lot about the groundwater. I just have this one slide. It is a very important part of the claim and part of the whole process here. But the groundwater was allocated to the two counties where the injuries were in Butte, Silver Bow, and Anaconda Deer Lodge County. Those counties developed their own restoration plans, and they have been implementing those. Actually, for the most part, they're done with those now. Butte was allocated $30 million, and Anaconda Deer Lodge $10 million, and they are pretty much done. Mostly what they did is they had their master plans for their city public works, and that's what they used to use these funds to help conserve water. So where are the projects located? The process plan and the long range plan identified areas where they wanted us to work. And where we wanted to work also to help us most effectively meet the goals of the restoration plans. So the injured areas were identified during the natural resource damage assessment. So the Clark Fork River is an injured area. The Anaconda Uplands is an injured area. The area around Butte are injured areas. So those are injured areas where we're supposed to prioritize work. The other place that we are to prioritize work are the priority areas. So I'm going to show you a couple maps here, but we work with the resource managers to identify the priority areas in the upper Clark Fork Basin. If we were to implement restoration projects and spend that funding there, that would be the most cost effective, and we would get the highest cost benefit from those projects to help us meet the goals of the restoration plan. So on the aquatic side, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and Nathan Cook, who now works for the program, was working with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks at that time and was involved in some of this stuff. The Fish, Wildlife, and Park resource managers helped us identify the priority tributaries in the upper Clark Fork River Basin. They actually scored all of the tributaries, or most all of the tributaries, and then ranked them 1 through 4. The process plan indicated that we should focus our efforts on priorities 1 and 2 to help us best meet the goals of the restoration plan. So that's why when we talk about that we're working on priority watersheds or working in priority watersheds, they're the priority watersheds that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks identified, but it's the 2 highest priority watersheds. And those are to, the main goals are to restore the fishery of the Clark Fork River main stem and Silver Bow Creek, improve angler days, improved recreation days, and to protect isolated native trout populations in these tributaries. So that's how those were selected. One of the requirements in the aquatic side was also to collect additional data and reevaluate the priorities. And I'm going to call out Nathan again. If you guys remember his fish phone or fish ear study that you did, this was part of that, this prioritization. Again, Nathan's work on that was key to this. So in 2018, we actually added 4 tributaries to the list. We added Rock Creek, Gold Creek, O'Neill Creek, and Basin Creek to that list. On the terrestrial side, we did a very similar thing. And actually Ray, who now works for the program, worked for Fish, Wildlife and Parks at that time. And Ray was key on helping us identify the priority terrestrial areas within the upper Clark Fork. So there are these areas in brown that are delineated. There's 9 of those. The one area in the terrestrial side that's not as well identified is that Fish, Wildlife and Parks identified all riparian areas within the would also be priority 1 terrestrial areas. So all riparian areas are key terrestrial habitats. Hesitating because there was one thing I was going to say. I'll have to come back. So those are the areas we work in, and this is table 6.1 out of the restoration plan. And I'm putting this up here, not for you guys to look at all the little things, but this is where you guys do most of your work. This is where the advisory council helps us allocate funding to the various priority areas. This is the watersheds. And this is actually where we do most of the reallocation of funding. The terrestrial funds have been spent down because of some large acquisitions and that type of thing. But this is where you guys do most of your work, helping us decide where we should allocate the funding and how much and to what watersheds. So if you remember this, for instance, Silverbow Creek at the top line, this last year, $500,000 was allocated to that from the parent reimbursement fund to do additional work on Silverbow Creek. And the same thing for the other numbers that are in the AC recommendation 2023 allocation. So that's where you guys do most of your work. You help us with this allocation. In addition to that, you do help us with some of the priorities on the within a watershed that I'll talk about shortly. Any questions? Yeah. Yes, Chris.
Chris Stark, CSKT. Your terrestrial and riparian zone, just from high water mark up or floodplain up, where is your riparian zone?
I'm kind of looking at Ray. I don't think we actually identified that.
Yeah, we actually didn't. I'll define it. It would be too big. But really, it's based on vegetation.
Okay, so
Here's a true way of doing that would be happening. We did not specify.
So the funding's allocated. The priority areas are identified. So how do we go about identifying where we're going to work in each of those priority areas, whether it's a priority watershed or a priority terrestrial area? In the watersheds, what we did starting in 2013 is we went out and collected data and did watershed assessments on all of the watersheds that we needed to collect information on. When I said that we needed to collect information on Fish, Wildlife and Parks, for instance, the biologist in the area at the time knew Warm Springs Creek very well. He knew what the priorities needed to be on Warm Springs Creek. So with the money that was allocated, he was very comfortable saying, these are your priorities on Warm Springs Creek. There are other watersheds, for instance, Blacktail Creek, which Jim will talk about later, the Little Blackfoot, Brown Squelch, Flint Creek. We didn't know what all of those, we knew what some of the priorities might be, but we didn't know what they all would be. So we went and did some standard assessments of those watersheds and looked at what some of the limiting factors were there for the aquatic life. and then rank those with fish, wildlife, and parks. The one note here is that on flow, the flow priority areas that Brian works with our partners, these were set in the restoration plan because we had a lot of existing data on flow. We knew where the dewatered reaches were on the Clark Fork River and on some of the main tributaries. So there was a lot of information. We didn't have to go out and collect that additional information. Those were identified. The terrestrial areas, we do assessments of those areas, but a lot of those a lot of the work in the terrestrial areas is identified on, but it's more of a landowner opportunities. So for instance, most of the money on the terrestrial side has been spent on protecting habitat, either through land acquisition or easements. You need a willing seller, either to sell their property or to acquire a conservation easement. So the terrestrial areas are a little different than aquatics, but as I said, a lot of that terrestrial funding has been spent down. We do feel that this is a very good way to look at the technical feasibility, look at the cost effectiveness and the cost benefit, because this helps us prioritize the highest projects first and making sure that we spend the money on those projects before we're spending money on lower priority projects. And I do have an example of that coming up. So what are some of the restoration actions? So the restoration plan does spell out actions. What needs to be done within a specific watershed or in a terrestrial area. And this is another thing that we do modify and seek your guys' recommendation for when we do a revision to the plan. Because as we're working in these watersheds, some of the actions that we're looking at, the priority of these actions may change. On the aquatic side, for the most part, fish passage and entrainment are the highest priorities. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has helped us identify that. Reducing fish entrainment into ditches and improving fish migration up over irrigation structures is some of the highest priority projects we can do to help restore those main stem fisheries. It improves their recruitment. In improving habitats, both in stream and adjacent to stream are a little lower priority. But in some watersheds, they are a little higher priority depending on what actually came out of the assessments. On the terrestrial side, as I said, we have recognized that preservation gives us the highest cost benefit. It's easier to preserve terrestrial habitat than it is to try to restore it. So through conservation easements or acquisitions, we've used those two tools to preserve property or habitat within the upper Clark Fork. But we also do work with our partners on habitat enhancement. One of the biggest things that we're doing these days is conifer encroachment, where the conifers, with the suppression of wildfire, conifers are encroaching out into the grasslands. So actually going out and thinning out those conifers and creating those or letting those native grasses take back over is an effective tool. So what projects are selected and when? So within a watershed or within a priority area, we use the assessment tool to help us select what project. And it's not just the natural resource damage program that does this. We do work with the resource managers, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, or DNRC. We work with our partners, Cod Unlimited, the Watershed Restoration Coalition, and the Clark Fork Coalition. Our partner contractors on a lot of these projects. They spend a lot more time in the field with the landowners and the resources than we do in Helena. So they have a very good feel on where things are. We also have to work with landowners. Most of the projects that we work on are on private land. Some projects are on state land. And I just remembered what I was going to talk about on the terrestrial priority areas. We do very, very little work on federal land. Actually, the the map of the terrestrial priority areas within the upper Clark Fork Basin was all private or state land. There was none of the federal land was included in those priority areas. So the one thing we don't do in the landowner selection or landowner input process is we do not select projects based on who the landowner is. We are basing the projects on the priority of that project to help us improve the resource. So I know Mike had a
Yeah,
question.
just gonna say, Mike Papelson has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Kristie. Mike Paffhausen from Butte. Is that the reason we're not working on federal land? Is that by circumstance or is that policy?
That was policy in the long range plan and the process plan. That's where that was established.
Thank you.
Mr. Beal has a question.
Yes.
What was the basis for that policy to not work on federal lands? If you recall.
I don't recall it right off the bat. I would ask, I don't, Ray, do you recall that?
So in the prioritization document, it's not the process. We made a decision that essentially there were existing resources on Forest Service lands specifically to pursue management actions. And that we focus on state plans. So we're funding that was available as well as what we should raise.
Makes sense.
Chris Stark, CSKT. So in the end, did that come to fruition? Did someone do something on federal lands that validated that assessment that they had money and wasn't an issue? Or there were nothing that you could do there?
So I would say, and Ray, there's some projects in the South Deer Lodge priority area where we did some habitat work on private land that was adjacent to the Forest Service, where the Forest Service was doing work. So our thought there was if we did the work on the private land, the Forest Service is doing work on the forest land that was adjacent to each other. There's a bigger benefit to the resource area because there's a larger footprint of activity.
Yes.
And just to follow up, so not a tremendous amount of damage done on federal lands from the actions of the government.
In terms,
State your name.
and on the specific.
Can you state your name?
Oh, sorry, I've been a key scientist, natural resource. Just trying to think through this. No, not predominantly the impacts were on lower elevation.
There.
Because in terms of the river, right, that's some state lands. In terms of like the history now. But again, the damages were actually state lands. These are good questions. I appreciate.
Yeah, this dialogue is good. So if you have these questions, I would further state though, Chris, that a lot of these projects, both in the tributaries and in the terrestrial areas, are what we would consider replacement activities, replacement actions. They're not necessarily restoring an injured resource. So working, for instance, we do work on Cottonwood Creek to help fish migration there. Those are replacement actions because Cottonwood Creek is not an injured resource. Same thing with the work in the South Deer Lodge terrestrial area that I noted that was adjacent to the Forest Service. Those weren't injured areas. The injured terrestrial areas are all up in the Anaconda area. And we are working on that area. We have the separate uplands, Anaconda Uplands Fund that we're working in those areas. So as we're selecting these projects, once again, we look at the criteria. We look at the NRD criteria to help us select projects and help us select what project we're going to work on. Is it technically feasible to put a fish screen in this area? Is that landowner a willing landowner? He may not be a willing landowner. We don't have under restoration, we don't have the authority to require that landowner to provide us access. Are there other issues? One of the main criteria and several of the watersheds initially was, and actually Racetrack Creek was one of those, and we've remedied that issue now, or I shouldn't say remedied, we restored that issue now. There was no flow in lower Racetrack Creek, so there was no reason to do aquatic restoration projects there that if Racetrack was gonna dry up every year. You know, we would lose that benefit. So the highest priority on Racetrack was to get flow. Once we got flow, and now we're considering projects now. Flow has been restored to Racetrack, and it's coming all the way down to the Clark Fork. So we are looking at trying to implement aquatic restoration projects there to further the ability of the fish from the main stem to go up there and spawn, and the ability of the fish within the Racetrack to migrate to the main stem park.
Kristie Beal, I have a question on the landowner willingness. But I want to preface my question first with growing up on a ranch. I'm not trying to say ranchers are not conservationists, because there's generations of my family that have been receiving stewardship awards before conservation easements were even a term. Are you seeing a difference in landowner willingness with the change in land ownership that we are seeing in Montana? There are outside wealthy people coming in and owning land that don't necessarily need to make their living off the land. Is there a shift that's happening?
You know, I'll start that, and then I'm gonna turn it over to Brian. Brian does more of the implementation in the last 10 years than I have. There are some areas within the Upper Clark Fork where, you know, we had to work hard, and our partners had to work hard to get us in to start working. Some people didn't think, for instance, Flint Creek, that we would make much ground in Flint Creek. Actually, we're making a lot of headway in Flint Creek these days. We've implemented enough projects where people are interested in it now. As far as the change, I will turn that over to Brian and let him turn it.
Brian, Aquatic Terrestrial Research Damage Program. So the first thing I will say is a lot of ranchers are conservationists. But that doesn't really matter. We work with a lot of ranchers that don't care about aquatic habitat, that don't care about fish, that don't care about water conservation. There is something that these projects work best where there's a mutual benefit to the resource and the landowner. So if they're getting a improved irrigation efficiency, if they're getting a nice head gate that they just have to turn instead of tarping off the stream, those are benefits to both. And like I said, honestly, a lot of people don't care about the fish, and we don't need them to care about the fish as long as they're protecting what we're putting in the ground and maintaining it according to the agreements. You know, in terms of, actually, I met with a ranch manager just last week. The ranch is owned by a very wealthy guy from Michigan. They are actually very conservation minded, and they would actually like us to do more work on their ranch. I think the kind of the thing is what people think as resource benefits aren't necessarily resource benefits. I've seen ranches that have all these nice woody structures in their stream banks where they get their flies to just float in the perfect place to catch the fish, so they can have their, you know, 2-week vacation in Montana and catch fish. That's, like Doug said, that's really not a resource benefit that we're looking for. Like habitat improvement is kind of lower on the list. So those are, I think that's the rub. It's like you're not, what people want to see from that rich landowner perspective is not what our priorities are. And that's where we got to match them up.
And Kristie Beal again, just thinking about our, you know, the educational funding that we've done, CFWIP, that will educate the children of some of those landowners, which may help educate some of the owners. But if they're only here for 2 weeks, we're not, that investment is not necessarily being that population of humans.
Yeah. I will say the ranch manager I met with, he was, out there with his daughter. So we had a nice long conversation with him about some of the projects. And his daughter was standing right there nodding her.
Great to hear.
So as an example, I'm gonna use Flint Creek as an example of how we see crunch projects and how we select. And one reason I use Flint Creek is actually Flint Creek's a pretty easy watershed for us in the prioritization scheme after we got done with the assessment. So the main stem of Flint Creek runs up and down on your screen there. The other watershed that comes off as you're looking at it to the right is Boulder Creek. Boulder Creek is a native trout tributary to Flint Creek. It has a native population of bull trout in it. Flint Creek itself, up to the downstream of where Boulder Creek comes in, has the Allendale diversion in it. The Allendale diversion is a large irrigation structure that I forget if did DNRC ever sell that? Did they give it to the water users? Not yet. So it hasn't transferred yet, but it's a DNRC owned structure that the water users are going to take over. But the data that Fish, Wildlife and Parks collected showed that it entrained over 50% of the fish in Flint Creek. So when we were looking at projects, it was very easy to list or put that Allendale diversion as the #1 priority on Flint Creek. We could work on a bunch of smaller screens or smaller irrigation structures. But if you're not taking care of that 50% of fish that's getting entrained into Allendale, working on those other ones is not going to be cost effective. You're going to get a very low cost benefit for it. So that's how we that's how we selected Allendale. There are also 3 diversions that were associated just downstream of the Allendale diversion. We worked on those at the same time because it worked well to combine all of those into one big project. On the same time, though, we had a couple of projects were identified on Boulder Creek, and our partners, it was the coalition, the Clark Fork Coalition at the time there, had identified the assessment had identified 2 projects on Boulder Creek. They were talking to those landowners. Those landowners are willing landowners to work on things. In that watershed allocation that you guys work on with us, when we allocate the funding, there was enough funding in Flint Creek to work on both of those simultaneously. So in the case of Flint Creek, we did get those projects done on Boulder Creek before the highest priority project was done. But we also knew that there was a budget that we were going to get the highest priority project done. The projects on Boulder Creek were not necessarily, they are connected to Allendale, but also preserving that native trout habitat in the upper parts of Boulder Creek was very important. So with the example I'm trying to give here is that we typically work on those highest priority projects and work our way down, but not always. And there's an evaluation process that goes into that to make sure that we can get that highest priority project at the end of the day. So now I'm going to turn it over to Brian to talk about project implementation. Right.
I was hoping they would ask you more questions before I got there.
Give me a look at that.
I'm Brian Barkowiak, Natural Research Damage Program. So Doug talked about how complex it was to get to selecting the projects that we do. And then once we select the projects, that's when I think the fun actually starts. And just because you go through that whole process, you get to say, hey, let's do this here, doesn't mean it just happens. That's where all the work starts. And that's what I'm going to try to talk about. So project development, as Doug mentioned, we don't do this stuff alone. We have great project partners, Clark Fork Coalition, TU, WRC, that's not here. They're kind of an extension of us. I mean, we're only a very small shop and they really help us get the projects done on the ground. We're not engineers either. We don't design these. So we do a selection to get the right engineer with the right skills to design the type of project that we're looking at. And again, you know, once these ideas are selected, they need to be designed. So just say you want to put a fish screen here, it doesn't mean all of a sudden a fish screen shows up. There's a lot that goes into that project design, including alternative analysis, and then finally preliminary and then final design. And then we finally get to the fun stuff of actually building the project on the ground. And then again, you're still not done because then you got to make sure the project is functioning according to the design, make sure the landowners are keeping up their portion of their agreements and making sure the project is meeting the goals that's intended to. I just picked some random projects mainly because they're the ones that I'm working on now and they're at the top of my head and I'm looking at Norm. We're talking about, okay, so it's a good idea to look at the coarse bedding diversion, which is just basically a stone's throw that way on the Clark Fork River. It's like, okay, so that's a high priority project. That's a priority for fish passage. That's a priority for recreational passage. That's a priority from an irrigation perspective. Great. You know, that's great. So what does that actually mean? This is being built in the Clark Fork River, so it needs to be able to withstand the 100-year flow. And so, you know, that's one of our design criteria is it needs to be stable up to the 100-year flow. You know, it is a diversion structure, so it needs to provide diversion water at those design flows. Sounds easy, but actually getting that design to provide enough water at those Clark Fork River levels is one of our criteria as well. Again, I said this is a passage project, both for fish and recreation. So there has to be enough water coming over the top of this diversion structure as it's providing irrigation flow, as it's stable in the river to be able to function as to meet the goals. And, you know, we do want to use natural material. So it looks like a natural feature in the river. It is, you know, again, it wants to look like a natural feature in the river, but it's not. It's an irrigation diversion. It's designed to deliver water. And so one of our design criteria is we want to be able to deliver the irrigators water 20 CFS at low flow conditions in the Clark Fork. So at 40, our design criteria for this project is when the Clark Fork River is at 40 CFS. 20 CFS is going down ditch to provide water for the irrigators. 20 CFS is flowing over the top of this diversion and providing fish and boat passage. There's another complexity on this that these water users also have water from Cottonwood Creek, which currently is intermingled with the ditch. And so we want to be able to separate those water, the ditch water from the Cottonwood Creek water and provide connectivity to Cottonwood Creek and still to provide the irrigators their water rights from Cottonwood Creek. This project started, when did you work on this, Doug?
2013.
2013. And it progressed for a while and then it ran into a major roadblock when the irrigator said, we don't want a siphon. We are not going to agree to a siphon to get that water over Cottonwood Creek. We can try talking about it, but they made a very strong case that they are not agreeing to that. So that is a clear design criteria that no siphons will be used. Again, Cottonwood Creek is a stream, so any structure we put in there needs to be stable to the 100-year flow rate. And then again, I'm looking at Norm here. Part of this project is on the Grant Course Ranch, which is a natural historic site. And so one of our criteria was to minimize infrastructure on their property. And And then, put all this together and we still want to put a fish screen on here. So we need to be able to put a fish screen and deliver irrigation water. Of course, irrigators don't like fish screens getting clogged with debris all the time. So we need to, put a fish screen that, can, be cleaned easily and meets criteria so fish actually don't get into the screen. So that's just some of the initial things you think about after you say, hey, this is the project I want to do. So then after you think about all those things, you start to talk about what kind of your alternative analysis. There's many different types of diversion structures, rock grabs, rock weirs, pouring concrete in the river, and a whole bunch of other things. So we go through the whole range of looking at all those things. Same with fish screens. Some are good at providing a range of flows. Some have mechanical brushes if you're close to power. Some have, they're all supposed to be passive and all supposed to clean themselves. They never do. But looking at all those range of conditions. And then sometimes landowners just say, hey, I saw this fish screen and I really like that. It works really well for this other guy I know. Why don't we put one of these in? They're the ones that are going to be maintaining it. They gotta live with getting their irrigation water. So that is definitely comes into our alternative analysis. As Doug said, we're not exempt from permitting. All this stuff needs to be permitting. So as we're thinking about all these different options, are there options that are more easily permittable than other options? We always have to consider the no rise analysis. And if we can't do the no rise analysis, then we get into having to do floodplain map revisions that can be costly. Sometimes the permitting of these projects is more than the project itself. So that's something to think about as we're talking about alternatives. And then I'll give you an example of constructability when we're out on Sagar Lane, but then okay, just because the engineer designs this, can we actually build this thing? You want a 20-foot, 20 by 20 foot boulder in the river that's stable at the 100-year flow? How are you going to pick that up and move it here? So there's constructability considerations. There's access restrictions. Again, okay, so this diversion might not be on the same landowner's property as the person who owns it. So does that person have any concerns in how we access? And then, finally, cost. We do look with all this complex thing, we do always look at cost. And does this project actually have a cost benefit in the end for doing it? Yes, Kristie.
Question. Actually, two questions. First, how are we going about selecting the engineer and the contractors that do this work? And do we have a good pool to draw from? And then secondly, how and when are the contractors interacting with the designers?
I will get into some of that, but in terms of engineering selection, we do a few different things. We do what we call a tier 2 selection. So we did a RFQ request for qualifications 4 years ago. So we went out and said, everybody out there that has engineering experience, give us your qualifications. And then we took all those and we evaluated those. And we have a master's contract list. I think we have 17, don't quote me. We have 17 qualified engineers on contract right now. And then within that, we do, for a lot of these projects, we do a tier 2. So, okay, within these 17 engineers, give us your qualifications and your proposal, and we can adjust the scoring and whether qualifications are more than cost is more than qualifications, schedule, etc. We can adjust all those in the request. But we say, out of everybody that's on our list, give us your proposal to do this work. And then we evaluate them and we select the engineering part based on that. There are some instances of that a certain engineer has been selected for a watershed. They've done the modeling, they know the flows, they've known the landowners. that can come into our selection. So we don't have to do the tier 2 if we have justification. This firm has done good work in this area. They know the area. They know the type of work that we're doing. It is the best benefit of the state to select this person for this job. We have the ability to do that as well.
Are we keeping the pool open enough such that we're getting good, competitive, qualified bids?
So that's just the engineering side of things. I'll talk about the contractor selection in a little bit.
Well, the engineers should be good,
Yes.
qualified, best bids.
And if they're not, we don't have to keep using them. So if we have a good firm that's working and it's in the best interest of the state, we will most likely stay with them. If they're not doing a good job, we have no obligation to keep working on them. And a lot of these projects, like specifically the one I was just talking about, we did what I was saying, that we went out to the list that we have and said, okay, give us your proposal of your cost and your ability to do this work. And so we do that quite often, and we go out and say, okay, give us your best proposal to do this work.
But sometimes if you just stay with what everybody's most comfortable with,
They get a little too comfortable, don't they?
costs can come up and you could be excluding ideas that are better on multiple levels, potentially even less expensive as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
More minds.
Yep. Yeah, we do. I think we do a very good job of keeping that pool open and making sure, I don't know how else to say it, but making sure the engineers are staying on their toes. Oh, yes, Chris.
Start CSKT. You touched on a couple of things that I'm not gonna pick on Norm here.
I pick on Norm.
Good, because I saw him smile when you picked on him. So I thought, okay, Norm's a good one. You gave an example of what there's 40 CFS in the river and they have rights to 20. What happens when there's 20 CFS? And here's where I'm going with this. What is your minimum in-stream flow? Because you also said, it goes dry. And that's probably not just nature.
No, so in Norm defense, he is not the only irrigator, the Park Service is not the only irrigator on the ditch. There are 3 major water users on that ditch that take the majority of that water, so that's but I will still keep picking on you. So we have our design criteria, in this case, it's 20 CFS down ditch when the river is at 40, but we don't guarantee water either. Under 40 CFS, the irrigators just might not get their water.
So there is a thought minimum in-stream flow. Is there a real minimum in-stream flow?
So, I mean, that's the other part of our program. That's our flow goals, right? I mean, like our goal at Deer Lodge is 90 CFS. And that's the goal our flow program is trying to get to. The reality is the river goes below 90 CFS. And we don't guarantee people water, just like before we touch their diversions, they are not guaranteed water when there's no water in the river. Just because you have a water right doesn't mean you are guaranteed that water.
Right. I guess where I'm going with my thought process is the tribes are now going through this last bit of the game. And we are saying there is an amount of water that stays in this stream. Yes, if it goes dry and there's nobody drawing water, that's life. But at some point in time, if you have a right, and you're not immemorial, you're out of water. And so that's what we're getting to is to maintain the bare minimum for fish livelihood. There's a minimum flow. And so I'm wondering, because I know in the state, in Missouri, there's minimum flows in a lot of places. So I'm wondering if there are in state-owned, rancher-owned, whoever owns that stream, are there minimum flows in this valley?
We have our flow targets.
No, the goal and the targets of.
But there are no minimum flows.
That's what
I'm gonna look towards Steven here.
No minimum.
We got some meetings, Steven's got some meetings coming up in the next few weeks, to talk about the Milltown Water Right Framework. That does have I can say that's an enforceable minimum flow?
Yeah, enforceable minimum flow is 500 CFS, but remember, it's still based on priority, so.
Sure.
You still have, you basically have anybody who's junior to that right, that you may be able to enforce. So any seniors or anything above that, they'd still be able to take, as much of their water. So there's no, legally speaking, with the exception of implementing a minimum flow, target and making a call on that water. As with most streams in the state, there aren't like, you aren't mandated, like water users aren't mandated to leave a certain amount of minimum flow in the stream. Right? So that's just the nature.
Well, we look at it the other way. It's has to be managed as that. It's not their choice. It's managed to that level. It's not someone deciding.
Maybe yeah, well, but there's no
what-
requirement for anybody to be managed to be that minimum.
That's what I meant. And we're all on the same page.
And the other thing I will point out, I mean, I'm throwing out 20 CFS down ditch at 40 CFS in the river. If you added up all their water rights on paper, it's way more than that.
Oh, no, we way over adjudicated. I got
Yeah,
that.
way
That's
over. And so, I mean, and that comes in with this alternative analysis too. I mean, we can't design all these things with paper water. There's not that much water. And so that honestly becomes a sticking point in a lot of these projects. They say, well, you're designing for 20 CFS. My water rate is 60 CFS. What are you going to do about that? And that's where we have to work with them and say, okay, you might have 60 CFS, but Andy can go out and measure your ditch and peak of irrigation, you're only taking 15. And so that's what we're going to size it. Usually the ditches don't have the capacity for their water rate. And so that does come into play with all these projects. Am I?
No,
Okay.
you're good. I just.
Christie, did you have?
Explain it very well.
Okay, you're-
Thank you.
Oh, yes, Pat. Oh,
Going back-
sorry, Mr. Pat House.
Thank you, Mike Pappas from Beal. Going back to permitting, mentioning, that's what was my background, I guess, for private industry back in the day. Extraordinarily expensive component of the project. As a state agency, you still have to get state permits.
Correct.
Federal mandatory.
Correct.
So US Army Corps of Engineer permits, all those. What about municipal?
Yep.
In law? This is in law?
Oh, so I don't know. I know when we've done work in Anaconda Geologic County, they have a development permit system. And we are required to get those development permits. We are just like anybody else moving dirt in that county. In terms of state permits, the state ones are generally the easiest ones for us to get because we do all these projects in coordination with FWP. And so by the time we get to the permitting stage of this project, FWP and the resource manager is on board with what we're doing. And they might put some, some conditions in, like we usually have to be out of the stream by October 15th. They always want to see more willows in the stream bank and things like that. But it's even more than general. They're always on board. But yes, I mean, we are not exempt from permits. So whatever someone would need to do as a private landowner or we need to do as well.
Thank you.
Yep. So we went through all this alternative analysis and this figure isn't meant for everybody to see, but we finally, at this point, get to a preliminary design. And that says, we're gonna put this type of fish screen here. It's gonna be this type of diversion. We're not piping the ditch. We're gonna keep the ditch where it is. We're putting the diversion on Cottonwood Creek on the south side, so it doesn't cause any more interruptions to Park Service property. And so this is the first time in this whole process that we have we have a general idea how much these are gonna cost, but this is the first time we get a preliminary design and a preliminary cost estimate. After that, and then we take that preliminary design to the final design. So then we finalize the drawings, we submit them to the appropriate agencies for the permits. And this is the time where we have signed restoration projects agreements with the water users and landowners. Again, we would be working cooperatively with landowners to this point, and we would not be moving forward with a project that they say, no, I'm not going to agree to. But they're not on the hook for anything until they sign that restoration project agreement at this time. And then this is the point that we put all the work in what we call an invitation for bid. And this is what I think is the fun part. This is like, how do you break up these bid items to share the responsibility or share the risk between the contractor and the state when you build this. Like everybody loves doing lump sum projects, right? You build me a diversion, you get paid one lump sum cost. Sounds great, doesn't it? What if there's a change? Who bears that change? Lump sums usually come back with a higher price for the state, and more risk for the contractor. So then you got to balance all these things, and I'll walk you through a pay request in a little bit to show you how we do this. But we put everything in bid items that describe contractors shall do this, and we will say it needs to be done to meet these specifications, and we are going to measure and pay it this way. That's what the bid package says. And then, this goes to your question, Kristie. Then that goes out to the whole world of contractors, and then they give us a bid for those items. And we, according to state procurement, we take the lowest responsible bid. So we do have to take the low bid. They do have to be a responsible bidder. So we do try to put qualifications in that you need to have done similar type of projects. You need to get bonds. You need to be insured. You need to demonstrate that you can meet the specifications that we put in there. And then we get our final, cost estimate. That's based on all these specific things. This is what we should cost. We don't give that out to contractors before we get bids. We keep that and we use that to evaluate whether their bids are in line with what we're thinking. And then at any point in time through this bidding process, we can say, hey, we thought this was $1 million job. Our lowest bid is $5 million. We're not doing the project. It doesn't have a cost benefit at that price to us. And then we advertise award. We advertise through the state's EMAC system. It's electronic contracting system. It goes out to basically the whole, I think it goes out to the whole world. I mean, we usually get Montana contractors. We have a preference that 50% needs to be Montana residents. But anybody who is qualified can bid on these jobs, and we do take a little bit. And then we implement the project. And I gave you all this is just an example pay request from a project that we're going to go look at. The first thing I would point out on this pay request, there's 3 signatures on it. There's one from the owner, Natural Resource Damage Program. There's one from the engineer saying that, yes, the work has been done, and I certify that work has been done. And there's one from the contractor that says, yes, I did do that work. And so, yes, Kristie.
Sorry,
Please do.
stepping back just one step. It sounds like we take it to final design before contractor involvement.
Correct.
Since I live and work in that world,
I figured you'd have
well, yeah, but I do it as far as like structures,
Yeah.
houses, buildings, not in this setting. So oftentimes when there's a complex project, the contractor gets involved early on before the design is finalized. Because like I said, more minds, sometimes the engineer has this wonderful design and everybody thinks it's going to cost $1 million. But if you involve the contractor earlier, they can say, oh no, that's going to cost you $5 million. However, why don't we consider doing it this way instead? And then we can probably get it down to 1.3 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Do they ever involve the contractor sooner than that?
The state of Montana very rarely does design build contracts. MDT does a few of them. I don't disagree that they are good ideas, but in our procurement, regulations, we design and build is harder to do.
And
Not saying you can't do it, but it is harder to do.
you don't have to do it as a design build though. You can have a design going on and you can have one or two or three different contractors on a pre-construction agreement where they're giving you feedback. Just because they have a pre-con doesn't mean they get the construction agreement.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're getting their feedback from one or two or three of them, sometimes your design can go in a different direction and it can be more constructible and less expensive. And you're getting those that are gonna have to build it, getting input from them while it's being designed. That's what I just wondering.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all do that as project managers as part of the design process. I don't know if it's not that formal, like we don't say, hey guys, what do you think? But I know as I'm working through these designs, I have some contractors that I've worked with and I know and I say, hey, do you really think you can move a 20 by 20 foot boulder? Like, seriously? And they're like, no, there's no way you can do that. So I think we all do it as part of our design process, but again, in state procurement, it's really hard to do design build. And I know CSKT, if you look at some of their big water projects, they are doing a lot more of that design build. But I've also, we've heard from SEP too, and they're, $10 million, $20 million projects. And they are, I'm surprised Seth has much hair as he has left, because the negotiations that go into the design build contracts and sharing of the risk and coming up with prices. Yes, but that is definitely something that I would like to do. I think it is a good idea.
If you have a project in mind and you think it's not going to work because of the cost, if you can do it, it doesn't have to be a design build. It can still be designed and then built, but during design, you may have some input from.
And our engineers do a lot of this too. They don't just say, hey, this is my great idea, go build. They are actually talking to contractors. They're talking to, for example, like the fish screen manufacturers, like, hey, I'm thinking of using this fish screen. What do I need to think about if I want to use this fish screen? Hey, would you take a look at these drawings and tell me what you think about them? So that a lot of that is going on in the background. Any other questions before I move on? So the point of this slide is it's not just NRD and the contractor, it's not just the engineer and the owner, it's not just the engineer and the contractor. It is the owner, we're basically paying the bills, contractors doing the work, and the engineer is there to certify the work is being done according to the plans and specs. Yes.
So just to clarify again, Mike Paphouse and Butte, NRDP is not the owner of these projects. You are the financier.
We are the owner.
You are the owner.
Yes.
Okay.
In our bid package, we are defined as the owner.
Okay.
And then the bid package defines a invitation for bid. It defines the contractor, that's the low bidder, lowest responsible bidder, and it also defines who the engineer is.
Thank you.
Brian,
Yes, Valerie.
Valerie Kurth, NRC. I think you were starting to explain how you manage the risk instead of doing a lump sum, but I don't know that you got all the way.
I'm good. Well, good.
Sorry.
Steve had that. And so, we can talk about this more in the field, but, this is what I think is the fun part of contracting, is figuring out how to set these things up so that you share the risk equally. So if you look at your second page, the big spreadsheet, and we're just going to go through, again, this is just an example from a recently completed project. It's also going to be the project we're looking at after the meeting. So mobilize bonding and insurance. There's very little that you can do about that. So that fits very well as a lump sum bid item. If you look at bid item 2, contaminant material removal, we have a pretty good idea. It's 4,200 cubic yards out there. but we don't know for sure. We do field verification as we're doing it. So that one makes sense to me to go into a cubic yard. So if it's more, you can easily pay for more. If it's less, you can easily pay for less. Some of these other ones do fit into good into lump sum, like temporary diversion, demolition and removal, on-site earthwork, borrow material import, again with contaminant removal, the more you take out, the more you need to bring in. So that one fits very well in a cubic yard bid price. And then, I'm going to skip over a lot of the lump sums, but like the rock weirs, like we think that we needed 54 large rocks and 49 small rocks to build this. Could have been 61 and 23, but we know we want to pay on that price. And so that's how we keep track of all that stuff. If you look down, as I'm sure nothing ever goes according to plan. So we did have some change orders. We were going to have Atlantic Ridgefield provide water. We actually got a cheaper price from the contractor to do it, so that's included to provide water. During construction, the contractor and the engineer said, hey, it would be really good for this head gate if we had some really good pit run in here to make sure that it's nice and stable. Engineer said, yeah, that's good. That's a good idea. That's going to improve the project. So we did bring in some pit run. You can see we've got road mix for a parking lot during construction. Clark Fork Coalition and TU are our project partners. And he said, hey, we kind of disturbed this whole area already. This would be a good spot for a makeshift little fishing access site. What if CFC paid for some pit run to pay for this? And so they paid us, we paid the contractor, and you'll see that we'll park, that there's a nice little parking area now. And then, the rest of these are the adjustments. So it wasn't 4,200 cubic yards, it was 4,200 cubic yards, was 970 cubic yards, it's not actual. So we paid out actual volumes removed, actual volumes brought back in. You can see that they actually use 50 large rocks. Actually, it's 100 large rock, but I'll talk about that differently. Instead of 54, they use 2 more smaller rocks. And so this is the level of detail that we are measuring and paying as part of these contracts. So it's not like, okay, here's our design, go build this and you get $1 million. It's here's our design, this is how you're going to build this, and this is how we're going to pay you for all these different aspects. Yes.
Sorry, Kristie Beal, is there, I assume this, and this is compared with each pay app on where are you and how are you doing in relation to what we thought this was gonna be?
Yep. If you look at the columns, there's the first 4 columns are the units and the contractor's price. The next 3 columns is what was previously billed to date. The next 3 columns are what is billed this period, and the last 3 columns are the running total. So you can see, we went 123% of contaminant removal. We went 135% of backfill, 93% of big rocks, 104% of small rocks. So we are keeping track of these on per bid item as running.
Kristie Beal, you have one more question. Is the project managers for NRDP that go in and check for scope gap or for scope overlap? Because sometimes a contractor will come to you with their bid and they haven't pulled apart their scope overlap, where on a house, let's say, subcontractor A says, I'm gonna do this for this price. And subcontractor B says, I'm gonna do this for this price. But they have overlap. They have 2 subs, but those 2 subs are sometimes putting dollars in on the same thing and it overlaps. So you can peel that out and say, we don't need 2 subs doing this. We only need 1. Bring your bid down $25,000. Is there somebody that does that?
It is, so that is, so the other thing, this is just the payout, right? There's a book about this thick that we call the project manual that has our contract, our require bonding, require insurance, and then describes the work, what's included in the work and what's not included. And so each of these bid items gets a number from the contract. And they can't come back and say, oh, yeah, okay, so you wanted 54 5-foot boulders, but you know what? I brought you 100 instead. Or I brought you 50 and my contractor brought you, my sub brought you 50, so why don't you just pay me for 100? That's all in this bid. And again, we sign it as the owner, say, yes, you did that. The engineer signs it and says, yes, I counted, there are only 54 out there. And the contractor signs it and says, yes, I did bring you.
Okay. I guess what I'm saying is sometimes, I know this myself, contractor bids sometimes they're turning and burning and getting their numbers from their subs, and they're not realizing that on this one thing, I have 2 subs doing that. 2 of the subs have this in their scope, and we need to peel it out so the scope overlap is gone.
So I'm not saying that can happen, but that usually falls out with the low bid. Like if everybody's doubling, if you have a contractor that's doubling up, they're going to be higher than the contractor that's not doubling. And so that's really up to the contractor to come into these bids with really sharp pencils that they've gone through that.
Have they done that?
Yeah. Now, that is not to say contractor A on bid item 3 might be more than contractor B on that bid item. But the first one has a lower overall bid, like those, it's total bid. So you can be higher or lower in certain items and still be low bid. And where they hide their cost in some of these things I'm not saying doesn't matter to us, but they can put that wherever they want. They still need to be low bid at the end.
Sure, I hear you. And I'm not saying that contractors are hiding their costs. Sometimes when if you got a bid deadline at 5 o'clock,
Yeah.
sometimes you get your bid at 4:45 and you got to plug the number in and you don't realize there's something that's duplicated.
And if they did that on a major item and they duplicated it, there's a very good chance that they are not low bid for that.
Brian, Mike Papas and Butte. It's fair to say though, these projects, there may be one subcontractor. Just because of the scope being narrow, and they kind of come in and they do most of the work themselves, maybe sub out the concrete pour or something like that, but.
Yeah, I think the way we write these contracts, I think that the doubling up of things is really hard to do. Well, it's not impossible, but it's hard to do. And again, it should fall out with the low bid.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, your point's valid, Kristie. I think that in my experience, you don't see a ton of subs on these type of projects. So that there isn't that duplicity opportunity or accident isn't as frequent, I guess. Is it like a major commercial project, building a 4-story apartment complex? Yeah. You're gonna have lots of overlap between plumbers and electricians and framers and roofers and siders and window guys and.
And I'll explain this one around on the tour, but this is just the diversion part of this. We specifically broke out the diversion part of this project from the irrigation portion of this project. Because people that work on pumps and pipes and electricity don't play with big rocks in the river. And the people that play with big rocks in the river typically don't work on pumps and pipes and electricity. So that is another part of how we put these things together, is making sure that we are asking for a bid that is of defined enough scope that we are going to get people bidding on.
Understood. So it sounds like there are, most of the projects, it's the general contractor doing the work.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I always like to say that we do very little.
Did Valerie have a question? I thought I saw somebody's hand go up.
No more.
Oh, okay.
So I touched on this already, but once the project's built, it's not done. We do have to make sure it's functioning as designed. So in the case, if the river is 40 CFS and they're getting 10 CFS down ditch, that's not functioning as designed. So what did we do wrong? Is there something that was built wrong? Is there something that was designed wrong? Is there something that needs to be tweaked? You know, a lot of these things are just, you know, they're systems, they need to be, figured out. So is it functioning right? Not only are we doing what we said we were gonna do, but is the landowner or the water user doing what they said that they're gonna do? So just because we put a diversion and a fish screen on your place, our program agreement says you gotta keep that in place and maintain it. We just don't say, okay, good, see you again. We actually go back and look and say, okay, did you rip this fish screen out while we were gone? Is it still here? Are you using it? Et cetera, et cetera. And then, you know, Nathan's talked about this at a lot of our AC meetings, but are these projects meeting our goals? Are they providing passage? Are they preventing fish from getting stuck in ditches? Are they contributing more fish to the river? And that's something that we're always doing. And I'm very disappointed that you asked me more questions than Doug. But with that being said, I'd be happy to take any more questions. Yes, Valerie.
Valerie Kurth, could you just clarify how the partners fit into the project implementation, like CU and Carver Coalition?
Do you want me to kick that to one of you guys, or do you want me to take it? Casey?
Casey Heckler, Unlimited. It depends on the project, but sometimes we've taken on procurement. Sometimes state does the procurement, and we'll assist with project construction oversight, work with the engineer. We tend to be cheaper than the engineer, so sometimes covering some of that construction oversight is more cost effective with partners that do the engineer to be out there every day. Kind of depends on the scope and scale of the project.
Yeah, Andy?
Yeah, and one other thing.
Andy Fisher, Clark.
Yeah, Andy Fisher, the Clark Fork Coalition. Everything Casey said, I mean, being part of it, I think the design team, helping review different components, the constructability of the projects certainly helps. Another thing too is like on that Sager Lane project, we directly contributed funding towards that. And we went out and helped secure cost share through a variety of sources, which can help defer some of the overall project costs for NRDP.
And then one quick follow-up, you guys also kind of drum up projects too, right, through landowner pensions?
Correct, yeah, we help as sometimes liaisons for coordinating the agreements and some of the terms under those agreements and staying in regular communication with some of the adjacent landowners on the progress of the project. Adverse impacts might be occurring, issues that come up.
We would not be able to do this work without our project partners, and we thank you guys very much for all your.
Chris, CSKT. So the TU, for instance, as an example, you're providing some monitoring post-project as well? Or is that all?
Yeah, keep all that it again. We tend to, all the partners stay involved with the long-term monitoring maintenance of these projects. So annually, a lot of times we go, if there's something mechanical, we'll inspect, make sure that there's any maintenance that has to occur, and then make sure it's still in place. All those project agreements have different monitoring and maintenance plans associated with them, and we assist in continuing to steward those through the length of the agreement. In some cases, we re-up it or revive if they go.
The point of that question was governments are kind of slowing down and partners are going to have to start speaking up. Glad to hear it.
Kristie Beal, during a project, if there is some sort of a dispute or an issue or something comes up that isn't contemplated, because that happens all the time. And the owner, NRDP, and the contractor can't reach an agreement on how that issue should get resolved and at what price. Who breaks that
There are, again, we have a project manual that's about that thick. The general conditions of construction contracts are supplemental conditions. Within those, there are provisions for dispute resolution. I've never actually gone there, so I don't know how it works.
Okay,
But there are provisions, if we reach loggerheads with a contractor, that there are provisions in our contract, how that gets resolved.
okay, okay. My second question is, once a project is completed and then an issue becomes apparent, oh, let's just say a river starts to cut out below a visitor center. That's not that old.
Oh, yeah.
How does that get handled?
So there is a, and I'll use Ray's project, and I think I know enough about it. He did some projects on, I can't remember which fish trap it was, but there are some deficiencies identified the year after. That was still within the warranty period and the contractor went up and fixed those. In the case of the not to be named project below a
Just so we're
former
doing
dam
something.
on the Clark Fork River, the contractor built the state park where the contractor was told to build the state park. He has no responsibility for that river cutting out under it. And so there's a construction completion form, and when that form is signed, it will identify any warranty issues or anything that needs to be done. But then once that form is signed, the contractor is done, unless there's something like warranties or something. But yeah, he is basically, once he is certified that the project is done to the specification, he is done. And then if it's not working, like the case I gave, we have a diversion on Mill Creek. It's not delivering the water that we thought it would, and probably a rock rolled at some point. We're gonna have to go in and fix that.
Understood.
Well, not we, because again, we don't do anything. We're gonna have to pay somebody else to go in and fix that.
But there's a process that I'm assuming is implemented if there's say, a design defect.
Correct. Yep. Our program agreements define what we are supposed to do.
Okay.
And again, this is where, if the river is at 30 CFS, your question, and they're getting 10 CFS water, but they were supposed to get 20, we can't do anything about that. But if the river is at 40 CFS and our design says that we're going to give you 20 CFS, then we do have to go to.
But if it's a design issue, shouldn't we be looking to the engineers?
Yeah, and we'll question them, like, why, like, okay, this rock, all these rocks that we said this rock was supposed to be, why do we not have enough water? Okay,
Any questions online, Jody?
No.
Can we take a break?
Yeah, let's take a break. We'll take a break 10 minutes early. We'll come back 10 minutes early. So let's come back at 1:45, please.
Oh, you're early.
Early.
Oh,
Oh, we're still taking, okay. Yeah, let's come back at 1:45.
Yeah.
Yep. So you mentioned all the backup documents.
Yes.
What each one of them is.
Yeah.
If you don't like something, then you don't sign up on it.
like for this, like there's a survey.
We got 4. I guys have 2 years. It's been up 2 years old, but
Still do.
in each district. It's got like Missouri, right? I really want it. There you go.
Yeah.
But you're really talented, really skilled.
Really talented.
I know.
Yeah. 20 different stuff. And so.
Sometimes.
Oh, yeah. You want to help.
Please push the gas.
But I assume you're still a fan. All of
Sometimes.
So the
it gets fired.
Right, sometimes.
Yeah.
That they have to go through administration. Dog. See, I went to the. You know, you say this is fire. And we don't understand anymore.
Get that rock out of there. Put that rock over here. Get a fly behind. I tried, thought I heard him describe. Sticks.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, yeah. They'll be pretty. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, that's what's good about, but, I mean, it's okay, you can work it out. Really hard to say.
I don't know why.
But they doubled up on a lot of these items.
They're not gonna be limited.
They're not gonna be low bid.
Right.
And so a lot of it doesn't even matter. Like,
Well, we also know that low bid, they can be within $25,000 of each other. Maybe there are still couple of in every one of them.
and then they're going back to their contract.
But the one you awarded in low bid, might be $45,000 theirs too.
CSK.
That's what I was just asking, but it doesn't.
We can't, yeah, I mean, we can't,
Works in view.
we can't dissect. I mean, we can't get into the nitty gritty of it.
Yeah.
And then,
Like you said, I'm sorry, it's just firm.
yeah,
Yes, exactly.
yeah, and, you know, and,
Sometimes that's where the profits are.
and,
I didn't know there was a problem here.
Maybe go with that. It's nice, it's hard. That's like if water's a lump sum. You're always going to- I don't think, nope, that's. We have enough water, let's do it. Put it in the water. They should make money.
you know, we want to write these specs that are always in favor of shaders. But you don't.
No,
We want to write these specs that we share the risk equal.
in their
Because
favor.
if they're.
It's just like. Business. Ones are considered.
Yeah. We want,
That's.
we want this final, we want that. We want that contractor.
Wants to be by the side.
Earlier, my. Ever go to.
You have to be asking. It's a trustee. You as an artist decide what to be or not. And then, but also, my guys have people working. So. They're share, it's not risk. It's oh, I got $500,000 here. I said, yes, I know. Client is general. $500,000 in my guys, I'm going to be able to pay ourselves. So I'm going to be able to continue working on your project. I do really want an unfair cost of this contract. That's going to cost.
Right.
Stop. I said, no, I actually don't want to. So I know. Yes,
400 is touched. So it's fine.
And at the end of the day, we want these guys, we don't want to put these guys in the chest. We want. We don't want to make them.
They'll love it, the job posting, yes, Robert's got business. And they know you pay and they're just.
Yeah.
That's back.
But we put a vision.
Nathan had one very desire. Oh.
That's all that's right.
I don't know. They don't do it like knowledge, but they're going to be able to tell you here.
Take a break.
No, I'm good. Go find that guy that.
I was wondering who wanted that.
What's that guy?
And that's what the check.
So we're still on hold for a second?
We are still on hold for a second. Not too long.
Where's that?
Yeah, it's good. No, I think you guys do. Stuff. Oh, yeah.
On site, and seeing it.
There was. Oh, yeah. So I just. We can't.
Nice to meet you guys.
They're the nicest people.
I think it's all. Come in
For tribes that work.
Eating their whole. Because. Yeah.
The whole thing. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
You too, pleasure.
Just.
Well, yeah.
So. You guys are kind of.
You're so right.
That's funny, because I got a thing.
He'll be so next.
I'm like, oh, man, I never together.
That's the final.
Yeah. That was rough. There was no. Involved. Well, my. I would get out and just get my own. Nobody more than everything.
No, everybody wants to get out.
Remind us of rain.
Well, 50 years from now.
And I'll talk to you.
Heritage, I see. Yeah, we had some big notes, but they didn't last.
One thing I'm emphasizing is money making jobs. It's always searching for people to develop. Right. Not different.
No,
I didn't want to go first.
all right. Sorry. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, let's get started again, please.
Yeah.
Turn it off.
All right. So I'm Jim Ford. I'm one of the staff people at NRD. And I've been managing the Blacktail Creek project for a number of years. I know you guys heard about this project last fall, so I'm not going to re-review what Doug, I think, explained before. I'll do a quick review of the project, and then I'll talk about what's occurred since last fall and where we're at now. So a quick overview of the restoration project. The primary actions, specific restoration actions for Blacktail Creek that we've identified are, of course, fish passage, as Doug described, for a lot of the drainages, fish entrainment, water quality, repairing habitat, and speed habitat. Now, this project has two parts. It has this head cut fish passage project that historically was called the sewer line. There's still a sewer line there. And then there's the second portion of it, the geomorphic stabilization, and that's the work being done down on the golf course. But again, to save money, and there's Mike brought this up, you know, these are very expensive projects to permit. So we combined these two, what were two separate projects into one. So we could do all our modeling, all our permitting in one time, and that was a pretty sizable savings.
And Jim?
Yeah.
Steve Hale, Anaconda, and maybe I misheard you, the water quantity, the water quality?
Water quality. Yeah. Yeah, there's no, what's that?
It says quantity.
Number 3.
Oh, okay, yeah, there's no change in water quantity here.
Just quality.
Yeah. But again, these are the restoration actions for the whole drainage, not necessarily just for this project, but these were for the drainage. So maybe I wasn't clear on that. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the head cut fish passage part, the sewer line. So here we've got Blacktail Creek. You can obviously see the golf course downstream. This project is just slightly upstream of the golf course. This is Butte Silver Bow property here. There's been development around here, and this was the set aside for the development of open space. What we're doing here is constructing 2 rock weirs in a step-full fashion up and over this impediment, and then we're stabilizing some of the stream banks and doing some revegetation.
This is a picture of the actual issue. So this is the sewer lines encased in cement, so it's inside there. At one point, that was at grade or below grade, below the creek. So the creek's been head cutting back up the creek. It's hit this sort of like an unnatural nick point. It's holding it back there, but of course won't hold forever. So this is an active sewer line. So when we started this project, the idea was going to be to jack and bore this sewer line back underneath the creek. But there's been so much development around this area. To do that, we would have to also install a pump station, which would have dramatically increased the cost of the project and probably kicked it over to being, non-workable. So our design here is to build a structure, stabilize this, build a structure where fish can get up and down. And of course, you've heard about FWP's done telemetry here, fish get stopped here. Sometimes they make it up in high water when this is pouring up, and then they get stopped from coming down. But it's clearly an impediment. Butte Silver Bow did some camera work on the sewer line. It works perfectly fine for their sake, so it doesn't really change anything in their operations. We're not changing anything on this casing. We're not fixing the line or anything like that. So this is the second part of the project, the geomorphic stabilization portion of the project, which is on the golf course proper. Now I'll explain here a little bit of the setup, just to make sure everybody's clear on it, because sometimes you get confused. Currently, this is Blacktail Creek flowing from left to right. This is a backwater. We call it a pond, but it's actually obviously part of the creek. It's hydraulically connected to the creek. This is where they pump out of to irrigate their golf course. There's a bat and board structure here where they back up the water. It backs up water into this pond. It also backs up water into the creek. This provides really good habitat for brook trout also. And our concept here is, now this is all permitted activities. They get all the water they need. They're not getting anything different from us. They don't have a problem that we're trying to fix. We're trying to get the stream separated from this pond. That's the whole goal here, is to get the stream separated from the pond so you don't have a structure in there so fish can pass. Now, fish do get through there. If I had a photograph of it, it would sort of look like a beaver dam. I mean, there is board batten structure in there. Then beavers get in there and they build up a dam. And they go in there every couple of years and rip it all out. But it's really destabilized the system. So this is part of the remedy for it. It's sort of a hard figure to see. You've got a reconstructed functioning floodplain here that allows the creek to access some of the floodplain, which you can imagine on something like a golf course isn't typical. The active creek channel is just above this floodplain. It comes around this. We rebuild a drier land on this, segregating the pond from the creek. Now, we're not moving the pond. We are expanding it slightly because they need enough capacity for their irrigation needs. And previously, some of their capacity came from backing up the water in the creek. So now the creek's free flowing through the site. They've got a water source, and then we have a diversion structure up above with a fish screen that diverts the water into the pond. This also has the benefits of any breeding brook trout in here that outcompete the natives, have no way to access the pond. Access the creek. So this is what it looks like above. Fish screen, the diversion structure. I think this is like a fairway or something through here. I'm not a golfer, but we have the water in a pipe, and then it opens up to an open ditch, then another pipe, and then discharges into the pond. So there's going to be some maintenance on there, and our agreement with the country club allows them to do the maintenance. Country club was fully involved. It's like Brian was describing how these projects sort of evolve before you get to design and permitting. There was a lot of issues concerning their operations of of a golf course. But in similar projects, if they were irrigators for hayfields, if they were farmers or ranchers, there's also similar considerations, that the considerations might be different, but they're just the same sort of complexities. If you really look through this, the end land use as a golf course is sort of irrelevant. They're just an irrigator. And we're trying to figure out a solution for their irrigation. So our schedule right now, we hope to be able to go out the bid here soon. June contracting, an early mob to get out there. So it's obviously a winter project. So November through March 2026. And of course, because of their operations of the golf course, that's sort of a really hard deadline that we can't impact their operations. And so we have to have the contractor out of there. And so our plan really is to get somebody going. The earlier we get them going, the less chance we have of any delays in the back end of it. And then we're looking about April 2026 for substantial completion. So when Doug presented this project to you guys last fall, there was this request for us to go out and look for some matching funds, which we did. Here are some of the funds we investigated that we didn't follow up on because we either didn't, there wasn't a good match, or the funds went away. So we looked at some Bonneville Power Administration projects. They didn't provide any funds to Montana. There was a couple different NOAAs for restoring fish passage. Unfortunately, they had like a $3 million minimum, typical Fed project. So that wasn't really a good fit. And then we looked into this Montana Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program, and that had some funding changes on the federal level. So those are ones we did pursue. These are the ones we did pursue. So we applied through Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks for a future fisheries grant. We received $30,000 from them. George Grant provided us with $2,000. Butte Silverbow, the owner of the sewer line, is supplying us about $8,000 worth of construction materials. The Department of Environmental Quality, we just heard the other day, we applied for a 319 grant. Our application was for $75,000, and we did not receive any money from that request. And then next, a week from today, we have a BNRC meeting in Butte, and we have an outstanding request for $100,000 for the BAO account. And again, that's a week from today. Obviously, our non-monetary contributions, Butte Silverbow, they've spent staff time in permitting and construction, and they'll agree to operate, and to perform operation and maintenance of the step holes, although I can't imagine really what that looks like unless there's high flows. But they're also supplying us rock.
Sure. Yeah, I don't understand why they're referred to as non-monetary contributions. There should be a price associated with staff doing that, and that should have been included in the total cost. But we should see a reduction in the total price of the contract, or the request for the price of those non-monetary contributions. I just don't understand that. I can understand Ripple, but I don't understand country club and Silvermore County, not, monetary contribution.
Well, I guess what we're trying to mean by that is actual cash in hand for the project to pay for the project.
But still, it should reduce the overall cost, because to replace other staff that would be required to do this.
Well, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Steve, and there probably is a component that sometimes it's hard to quantify, and sometimes when you do quantify those things, people criticize you because they say it's not real. But like for the country club, say for example, they did spend a lot of time working with us on the conceptual design. It was more of them informing us how they operate, their needs, the complexities of a golf course, because we're golf course people, right? So I know it made a much better project that will work for them. I don't know how much it really saved us in the design, although maybe we didn't make mistakes that we would have without talking. Kristen,
This is Kristie Beal. Following up on what Steve said, not design that you have identified in your non-monetary contributions there. It's operation and maintenance, which should have had a dollar figure attached to it in the ask. If they didn't, they also were not complying with our requirements where we have said you need to have operation and maintenance included, because we're not going to keep funding projects that nobody can pay for to operate and maintain. So there should have been a component of operation and maintenance in the ask, which should be reduced by the two top components of your non-monetary contributions.
okay. You want to take it first?
This is Doug Martin. So Kristie, to address your operation and maintenance, so the projects that Brian talked about, we fund the construction of those projects. The operation and maintenance of those projects is funded from the operation and maintenance line item in our budgets, in the allocation budget. So, we fund, operation and maintenance for those out of that. The operation and maintenance here is similar to what a landowner or rancher would do to make sure a screening is continuing to operate. So there are certain commitments that Butte Silver Bow and the golf course have agreed to in our landowner agreements and our project agreements that they will implement those. So we don't have for instance, we don't have an operation and maintenance line item in this project budget. We have a construction budget. That operation and maintenance for that is operated out of our operation and maintenance fund. We will add, for instance, the fish screen for the golf course that will be added to our fish screen maintenance program. So we have an agreement with the Watershed Restoration Coalition, where they have a staff person that goes around and maintains those screens. So I think I'm explaining that correctly.
This is Kristie Beal, for Steve and myself, are you saying that the non-monetary contributions on the screen by Butte Silver Bow County and Butte Country Club will not reduce the operation and maintenance allocation from the NRDP? Is that accurate?
So this is Doug again, their contribution to this project will reduce the operation and maintenance, because there are certain requirements that we've asked them to do.
By how much?
So it would be, I can't put a figure on that. We will do the normal, operate, for instance, on the fish screen itself. We will do the normal operation and maintenance on the fish screen. Their responsibility is to operate the diversion to make sure they're getting the water they need. We are not doing that operation. That's their job, to make sure they're operating it to get the water, much like an irrigator would, to make sure he's getting the water. But putting a value on that, can't put a value on that to say how much that's going to decrease. That's not going to decrease our operation and maintenance at all. Because we've already committed to maintaining the screen. If that is a precise, that's not, it's something maybe that the golf course superintendent could do. But we have a contract with a WRC contractor who, that's what he does. He goes around and he maintains all the screens in the upper. He is.
Steve Hale, Anaconda, staff time and permitting construction. Isn't that included in the original cost?
It was included in the original cost, yeah.
Okay, so there should be a monetary value associated with that. It can.
Well, they didn't do any of the permit. We did all the permit. Property. I mean, their involvement, they did spend a lot of time on it. But their involvement was making sure that we were covering all their considerations, right? So they would like the golf course, the operator of the golf course spent a bunch of time with our design. We actually had some really good productive feedback helping design. But they weren't involved like, oh, we'll go out and get that permit or we'll work with you. I mean, we did the permitting. They gave us making sure, And I guess where it really saves time, Steve, I hear sort of your point is that there was no redos or anything because we got all the necessary information up front from it. And I think that's the real benefit. But I see your point, like, we could probably go back and try to figure out like how much time did you spend on this and what your time is worth, and how that impacted it. But when we're talking about money now, it's just for construction. It's not a lifetime. We're not saying this is the lifetime whole project cost. This is for just constructing. Right. So when we see numbers or whatever, this is just construction. It doesn't get into what Doug was talking about as far as operation maintenance.
Operation maintenance is out of another fund.
Yeah.
Yeah. Steve Hill plan come.
Chris Stark?
Chris Stark, CSKT. So addressing that first bullet point of the non-monetary contribution, staff time and permitting. Just heard you say they didn't do any permitting. Construction, we're not even there yet. Operation, maintenance, none of that's happened.
But no,
So they're pitching that for the forward then.
no, permitting has occurred.
You said you just did the permitting.
We did the
They
permitting.
didn't do permitting.
No,
I understand that. I don't go to North.
let me give you a good example. 'Cause I think there's some misunderstandings here. So say, as for an example, View Country Club, pretty sizable, high number waterway on the site. We had to, because we're changing the point of diversion. They didn't need to change the point of diversion. We needed it for the project. They had to give up about half their waterway. Again, paper waterway, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for a lot of people, and then we've probably all experienced this, they felt like it was real water. Like they were giving up a sizable waterway. So we had to work through that with them. Otherwise, this project wouldn't go. We wouldn't have been able to move the point of diversion. So they didn't do the permit, but they had a big involvement with it. Like they did have to sign papers with the DNRC on their waterway. They did have to give up that.
So that would be a better bullet point. On it, right? Not permitting.
Well, I mean, it is a permit. I mean, water rights are permits.
So they were involved in permitting. When you say you guys did all the permitting, they didn't. That's not correct. They did some of the permitting.
No, we did the permitting. Yeah, they did sign some. So they did sign some of the papers.
I'm trying to figure out what they actually did or have done. And it sounded to me like they said, okay.
What's that?
Sounds like they said, okay.
Right, so this is Doug Martin. The way I look at this, and I've been, we've talked about it as a staff to try to pitch it. This is no bit different than working on, Brian's project over here that he talked about on the Grand Forks Ranch. We have to work with those landowners. Those landowners have an investment. They've invested time looking at the design, making sure it's gonna meet their requirements. It's gonna be something that they're willing to work with. That's the same type of thing that we're trying to say here, is that their staff has worked on the construction. Both Butte Silverbow and the country club will have staff there watching the construction, making sure that the contractor isn't doing something out of scope that's damaging their property further. So that, have we quantified that? No, we have not quantified that dollars, but those are real dollars, much like any landowner or water user.
I'm just trying to get to the end point of this discussion. Do you guys get compensated in any way, shape, or form for your time out there? By the state? So that's what the question was, why isn't there a dollar amount here? Because everybody else is just sucking it up and doing it on their own, is what I'm reading here.
You just looked at Steve Hill and on the total cost of the project. That's what when I read these numbers, the total cost of the project. That's what I expect to see. I expect to see everything accounted for. And whether it was in-kind services 2 years ago, 5 years ago, the project's been on the books for what, 10 years?
10 plus years.
10 plus years, and it's now all of a sudden a priority. But it's also doubled in price too. So I just need to understand, if we're gonna try to get 10% of the reserve funds to finish funding this, I need to understand the total cost. clear.
A quick caveat, just to follow up, this is Kristie Beal, Missoula, on what Doug had said. I hope that we have our contracts written such that Butte, Silver Bow County and Butte Country Club can't be going out there and giving instructions to the contractor. That should come from the owner.
Just,
Okay,
Yeah, that's how it's written.
I just heard something different here and I want to make sure that was
I
clarified.
I guess if they are out there doing that, they will be talking to the owner or the owner's rep, our engineer, to make sure that
Be
they're.
very clear in your contract, contractor does not take instructions.
Right.
Except from owner's project manager.
Yeah.
Because if you have all these other people out there, taxpayers could end up paying for things that are not part of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, no, that's a very good
Or
point.
state.
Yeah, it's, all right. Any other? Yeah, sure.
Every time somebody throws brook trout in the equation, I go, why? Oh. Is there a reason the state's trying to save brook trout here in this particular?
We're not trying to say brook trout.
Okay, that's why.
This is Doug Martin. We're not trying to say brook trout. Actually, brook trout are very prevalent in Blacktail Creek.
Right.
But this pond has been identified as a potential breeding area for brook trout. And actually by creating the better flow through the area and eliminating that habitat, it will improve non-native or it improve native trout habitat.
Yeah, so this pond is gonna be separate off the creek now, where now it's connected. So. Yeah. So, yeah, so it's, whatever brook trout.
No, I'm good. You've already got it. Not aiding the brook trout. That's all I need to hear.
Yeah.
So, Jim, Steve Hill,
Yes, sir.
kind of, just so I completely understand this, you're providing a barrier from the creek to the pond to eliminate flow from the creek to the pond, and then you're adding a piped system to contribute their water rights into the pond
Yeah.
and stop fish from.
Yeah, so we're trying, in effect, trying to make the creek free flowing through the golf course and taking the pond off the creek so they can get their irrigation water. In a real simple sense, it's really not any different than a lot of irrigation projects on ranches and stuff. The end land use is different. That's different. And there are some complexities, but yeah, that's it. Yeah. See if I get back here. Okay. All right, so, the money, our current status is, the current allocation is $531,000. Future fisheries is $30,000. You can see, I don't know why it says 60, maybe that was the request. We got $2,000 from George Grant, which was appreciated. Butte Silver Bow, so this is actual value of the materials that they're supplying, which is some of the big rock and materials to build those steps. The country club is just their in-kind time. We now know, I guess the slide was before, we're not getting anything from 319, and then we'll find out next week or later on when the trustee, the governor, makes decisions, if any money's coming from Butte Area 1. So the subtotal here right now is 571. Engineer's estimate is about $900,000. That includes the construction management, and then we have our permitting requirements at the end of the project. We have to go back to the Army Corps of Engineers with our models and show that we didn't change anything. So right now, and again, this is an engineer's estimate, so I want to just point this out. This isn't a bill. We don't know how the bids are coming in. I've been hearing, I was just on a phone call an hour ago or so with some contractors about how contracts are coming in and what their availability is, but that's our estimate right now. Being based on bids. So we're about 329 short. Go on, is there any?
I do have a question. The Butte Silver Bowl $8,000 figure,
Mm-hmm.
from the discussion we just had, should that be a $4,000 figure? Or have we allocated $4,000? Back the prior slide you were just on,
So,
right there.
Yeah.
Silver Bowl, 8,000.
Mhm.
Construction materials and in-kind time, $4,000. I thought we just had a conversation that you couldn't put a dollar figure on the time for permitting and O&M.
Yeah, I think this was an estimate looking forward as far as maintenance. They're gonna build like, right now, they don't really have access. We have to access in through the corner of the golf course to get to this location. Surrounded by houses. They're gonna put in a fence and some other materials because they want to be able to access this point if there's a problem.
Right, I understand the materials.
But so the materials is that's just. Our engineer's estimate was $8,000 for those materials, and they're giving us those materials. So now that comes out of the engineer's estimate because they'll be stored down.
Okay, so the $4,000 figure that's listed there for time for permitting and O&M,
Yes.
that's and instead of, no. Okay, I don't understand that line item. Please explain.
The $8,000 is straight off for materials. They're gonna bring us $8,000 that was gonna be the responsibility of the contractor. We need, like Brian, his example, we need 50 boulders to build these structures. Butte Silver Bow's gonna procure those materials and they're gonna haul them and place them down at the site. So they're on site for use for the contractor. So that saves us $8,000. So that's just a 1-for-1 exchange dollar.
Okay, Kristie Beal again then. Part I don't understand about that line item is the part that said in-kind time, $4,000, time for permitting and O&M. That seems to be the issue we were just discussing.
Yeah, I don't, to be honest with you, Kristie, I don't know what that $4,000, if that was originally supposed to be in there or what that pertains. We've never asked Pete Silverwell like what their time is worth and stuff. We do lots of projects with them. For all our other projects, we've never really tried to estimate what those values are, but I can tell you this 8,000 is a true $8,000 worth of materials.
Yeah, and Steve Hill, and you identified that as materials in the monetary category.
Yeah,
It's just still
that 4,000.
the $4,000 and then the $5,000 country club, that, that's $9,000 if you could subtract from the 329. There.
Right.
Well,
Even if it's an estimate, we all make estimates.
All of this is an estimate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that would be true if this permitting, post-construction permitting O&M was part of this, but that's not part of this.
Yeah.
So our what I say there are permitting activities out there, but this, like Doug described, this does not include like long-term O&M. So this isn't like the all-in cost over the next 20 years. This is just construction, right? And so I think sort of what we're getting crossways here is part of what you guys are asking is sort of what is that all? Which is a logical question, including.
Yeah. Steve Hill again, Anaconda. So because this project's been on the books from 10+ years, why are we looking at it now? And I think we may have had that discussion last meeting too, but.
Yeah. So this is Doug Martin. I'm gonna jump back to the original photo that Jim had up here.
And Doug, if I might caveat that, please. Why is it important enough to risk some of our reserve?
Okay, I will try to adjust all of that. So as I was in Jim's position back in 2012 when the plan was, we had finalized the plan. In 2013, we had Montana Tech help us with the watershed assessment. Where we went out, we assessed the watershed, and we identified the issues that were occurring on Blacktail Creek. This was one of the problems. This whole stretch from where Jim talked about where the yellow line comes down to the sewer line, all the way along Blacktail Creek into Butte was identified as an area of instability. There's the channel is incised to this area, i.e. that's why there's a head cut at the sewer line. We actually, developed a conceptual plan, with a contractor, to look at trying to restore this entire reach of Blacktail Creek. We had some conversations with the golf course about it. It was quite a large undertaking, at that point, but this was a priority area. Some of that, was also tied to the larger project at the Parrot. We had hoped to use some of the material, that was excavated from here as backfill in the Parrot and have a cost share with that. That did not come, to fruition because the materials here, for some reason, they're mostly sand, but they have a pretty low pH, in this area. It used to be an old reservoir. There actually used to be a large dam here, back in, historic times.
On Blacktail.
On Blacktail Creek, yeah, it was a recreational area for. So that larger project that we had got scaled down. And what got scaled down to were the priority projects or the priority issues on Blacktail Creek in this area, i.e. the sewer line, because we had fish passage upstream and downstream on that, as well as the fish pond. The fish pond was one of those areas that was the biggest impact to the fishery in this area.
Keep talking, Doug, we're sharing. Present our view again.
So that's that's why it has taken, it has taken a long time, much like the Coors Manning project out here that Brian talked about earlier. And, I had started on that project back in that time too. We were working with the landowners. There were some landowner concerns about where it was going. And, one of the landowners, really wasn't interested in moving forward. So that project got laid down. Now it's getting picked back up. So the cost of the project that Brian's gonna work on is gonna be more than it was when I was working on it 10 years ago. And it's the same thing here. This project was started and it's just the sequence of things and the timing of things. And it is, now it's on a book of, we have an agreement with the landowners of what type of project that we can do. It's still a priority project in this Blacktail Creek drainage.
And the benefit is Steve Hill, Anaconda, minimizing the brook trout predation in the stream.
No, not the main part is fish passage at the sewer line,
Maybe.
as well as fish passage at the in better geomorphic conditions around the pond. Instead of having that pond connected to the stream, now it's going to be off stream and the water will be going around.
Kristie Beal. But back to Steve's question, it's been on the books for so long. Is it really such a time-sensitive situation that this advisory council should be asked to dip into the reserves?
The staff, we do believe that the cost benefit for this project is still there. That this is one of the last priority projects on Blacktail Creek. It provides the connectivity to Blacktail Creek, which just shortly downstream, or not very far down, joins into Silverbow Creek. One of the main goals of this is to restore the fishery of Silverbow Creek. So yes, we do believe our recommendation is to use the contingency for this. There's $1.3 million in the contingency. We would use, going back to Jim's budget table, there's a shortfall from an estimated standpoint of $300,000. We'll know exactly what that shortfall is when we get the bids. If the bids come in at, where it's a $500,000 need, that's a different story. That's a different cost benefit, but the bids could come in lower where it's not a $320,000 shortfall. It could be a $250,000 shortfall or something. What I would propose and we would propose that we would, use this. There, as I said, there's $1.3 million in the contingency, in that table 1.6, there's a line item for contingencies. There's 1.3, an option, if there is a concern about that number being, pulled down, is during the next revision, is to use some of the, allocation authority that we have to, and you're working with you guys to put more money back in that contingency. So, I mean, this contingency is basin-wide, and it's for all the projects, you know, from Basin Creek at the top of the basin to, you know, to Rock Creek at the lower end.
You can see, help from Anaconda. How much further does Blacktail Creek go above this project? And is it natural stream through all the urban part of Butte? I just don't know what's it.
So that was one of the restrictions or one of the issues that we saw in the assessment. It does run through a I guess, I don't know, Mike, you could help. It's kind of a subdivision. The south, that valley of Butte is subdivided, and it winds up through, it does go up into the Highland Mountains, where there is some additional work that we have done up there, at the headwaters to, work with the native tribe.
Mostly residential, and then I'd call it like small farmland that continues all the way to the base of the highlands. And then it kind of splits into, I'd say, two main tributaries that feed it. And mostly residential up both of those canyons as well, but it probably goes up another 7-8 miles.
It's
a pretty
big water.
I mean, I'm talking river miles too, not linear, but it goes up quite a ways and feeds to pretty large drainages.
Chris Gardner, CSKT. It's my understanding that you do have a cost benefit analysis of some sort that you could share with us. It says there's 8 miles of stream, it's used by this, has nothing to do with Silver Bow Creek, or it's a great juvenile rearing habitat, something in writing that we can look at this benefit that you, I think that's what my questioning is what is the benefit here? It sounds like the brook trout have taken over this portion. They've got a breeding population. And you're going to eliminate that. That's a benefit. So is there something in writing that you guys can share with us that spells it out in dollars, perhaps?
We don't have, we have a checklist criteria evaluation where we said, you know, is it a high cost benefit? The benefits commensurate with the cost, or is it a low cost benefit?
Can you share that? So we can know what your check boxes look like exactly. Because it was just.
We can, I mean, it's not something we got prepared to present.
No, I just meant, because I'm stuck on this thing of the benefit. The stream downstream of here are suffering greatly right now. I think a better place is a person. I want you guys. So that's why I'm querying. What do we know about the benefit here? And so far I've heard it's a checkbox, which makes me pretty concerned.
So Casey, I noticed, Casey Hackman has worked on this.
Fine, but that's context. Casey Hackman is trying to limit it. So we worked on some of the assessment on fish passage, part of this under the development of original plans, and Silver Bow Creek was repopulated by cutthroat that colonized, reconnected German Gulch. And ever since then, that's been pretty much the sole source of spawning and recruitment to Silver Bow Creek. Since the beginning of this, reconnecting Blacktail Creek and Browns Gulch have been priorities to add some redundancy for those cutthroat. And reconnecting spawning habitat that's upstream of the site up on the forest, Thompson Park direction. And Caleb Erling is not here, completed some telemetry work just a couple of years ago showing that cutthroat are able to complete that migration under certain conditions. These two projects are the last two of the fish passage barriers in the lower part of the valley. There's some road crossings on Roosevelt Drive upstream in there that supposed to be taken care of through a grant that UCFRB is working on to improve road crossings upstream of there. That would also help with this, but this is a priority for the recovery of the cutthroat population, just to add connection to the spawn, to more spawning habitat available just through tournament.
So they are spawning up there now.
Yes. Under certain flow conditions.
Sure,
Yeah.
get over the sewer.
Yeah.
In proportion to the value of that, to fish spawn, that's awesome. Maybe not. What sort of breadth width population you're looking at for spawning habitat? I totally get it.
That's a good question. I think that'd be.
So we don't have.
Just the brook, Nathan, sorry, Nathan, but how much after we through this year? Yes. Yes. Sorry.
They're in the Silverbow Creek watershed. There are literally only 3 tributaries that provide fish to Silverbow. One of them is Blacktail. So in terms of cost benefit, how do we get more fish into the Silverbow Creek, especially where people can use them and enjoy them? We have 3 options: South Gulch, Blacktail, or Adjourned. And I mean, that's just, we don't know exactly how many are coming out of all those sources. We know German Gulch is the big one. But just sort of statistically and spatially, those fish coming out of Blacktail are hugely important for populations. There's no other place to get them.
Other than the other 2. Right. And did you suggest that there was some still some barriers that to those spawning grounds that need to be done down the road? So when you say these are the last 2 pieces, is that correct? There are.
These are the last 2 on it.
The laundry is the success.
Yeah, Chris, the culverts that Casey referenced, the UCFRB has a federal flat grant, it's a transportation grant, to take care of those.
Okay, so they're.
Those are supposed to be in the works. And I would say one thing in that, went back to the presentation I gave earlier of how we develop these projects. This is how we consider a lot of the, and maybe this is something that we need to refine. We don't write up, this discussion that we just had, we don't write up all of these for every project. This is the discussion we have with our resource managers and our partners, about, how are we gonna, move forward with projects, or how are we gonna select one project over another?
Kristie Beal, one, I want to say thank you to the NRDP staff for obtaining the grants, for searching for the grants, and $40,000 does make a difference. I hope it's going to be $140,000. 2, I will say, and I am not an engineer, but I will say, just looking at that not floating, because I get it, it's attached on either end, sewage pipe. I know it's holding now, but as things get cut back further and further, how long is it going to be stable? As the ground on the edges of it gets cut back even more, then I don't want to wait for a hot mess, is what I'm saying.
Nope.
And 2 or 3, I would, if we're going to put forth, it is an action item. If we're going to put forth a motion, we need to make sure we take into consideration that potential for $100,000 additional funding.
So I forget what number 1 was.
Thank you for the funding.
That's amazing. Number 2, so with the grade control structure, and Jim, please let me know if I'm saying this wrong, but that grade control structure, that rock ramp, those rock structures that are built here, there's vegetation going around the outside of it to stabilize the vegetation, so we're not getting lateral movement. That grade control structure will hold the elevation of this above that pipe, so the water will continue to go over, and that head cut will not go further upstream and isolate that pipe further. So that it's a great, basically it's a rock ramp, but it is a grade control structure to hold the elevation of the stream.
of the stream at the current elevation.
But if the stream is cutting down below, that those structures holding it on either end, whoever designed those structures that are holding it up on either end, how low did they contemplate the stream cutting underneath?
They designed it to do exactly, to not do exactly what you're worried.
Okay, so that's protected. I don't have to see about that tonight.
Yeah, you can see.
Jim,
Keep going.
Steve Hill, Anaconda, back to the water quality, considering that it goes through subdivisions and into rural parts towards the highlands, what is the water quality?
Well, the water quality up there actually looks, there's quite a bit of water quality data because of the circle site.
Yeah.
There's a lot of monitoring. Of course, a lot of that's focused on metals. But we have a lot of other, organics, nutrients, and the water quality actually looks pretty good through this reach. I mean, so as Mike had mentioned, some of these are much larger plots as you get further up in the drainage. I mean, they're obviously on septics, but they're on larger plots. So the water quality is actually looking pretty good. And from a metals perspective, the limiting concentrations, if you want to think about it as a chemical block that occurs just downstream of this. And that's being addressed in the BIPSU consent decree. So once you get into town, once you get just beyond the golf course and into town, Blacktail Creek, all the way until it meets with Silverbow Creek, they're doing a bunch of remedial efforts there to capture contaminated sediments, to capture the contaminated stormwater and treat it before they discharge it. So there's a whole bunch of activities where the water quality is really poor on Blacktail Creek, occurring right now.
Okay. And currently, does that impede any of the fish population?
Oh, I'm sure there has. In fact, I can't imagine what sort of fish, the fish that I think are typically, I'm only a fisherman, not a fish person. So I think they move through there. It doesn't seem like, except for these, the trout, it doesn't seem like anything hangs out of it.
Mike Bathhouse and Butte. So a couple comments. First is, thank you to, these guys came with zero match in the fall, and per the math on the potential real dollar match is at 15.5% within kind. Granted that $9,000 was greatly deliberated, but that's 16.7. So that's a lot of progress in a very short amount of time. We appreciate that. And that's something that we expect of all project work, and this was a challenging one because they were a project in the works long before that became a requirement. So sadly, we call that collateral damage at times. In regards to this as a stream in Butte, you guys need to remember Butte's a different town. Every community in Montana is built by a river. Almost all. Butte was not, because it's a mine camp. Anaconda has Warm Springs Creek, which runs right through the community. Blacktail Creek is the only waterway that runs free flowing through the community, especially upstream of the golf course, where I'd say development hasn't greatly impacted it. It is a great waterway. And the ecological benefits, maybe not well researched. You just go walk it and you're going to see that this could be, it's the main stem of the Columbia River up there. So it's while there is a couple of entrainment issues going on, I mean, for the potential of Silverbow Creek inside of Butte proper to have cutthroat, they're not going to get above these barriers right now. We have to address issues so that it can get over this sewer line and get up at the upstream and start developing spawning habitat and having a place where our kids can fish. Our kids fish in the pond right now. It's stocked. It is a tier 2 priority watershed, so I do want to remind the group of that. One other thing is that there is a shortfall through 29, I guess that could be down to 229 if I saw that math correctly. So if Kristie would entertain it, I'm happy to bring a motion forward.
Further discussion? I think we take your motion.
Okay. So I would make a motion that we, recommend that we take 229 to 329 not to exceed from the aquatic reserve funds. If it does exceed, it's to come back to this council, to help get this project to a biddable condition. Under the contingency that at the next reallocation of interest, that the aquatic reserve fund is priority number one of being replenished, whatever was borrowed for this project, 229 to 329.
Yeah, Doug.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Please.
I was trying to write that down. You said recommend 229 or
Well,
329?
it's really the 229 if the $100,000 grant that's outstanding was to be accepted, 329 if it's not.
This is Kristie Beal, Missoula. Would you be willing to consider amending your motion to have it be for 329, reduced dollar for dollar by the outstanding $100,000 grant
Correct.
in the amount of
Yep.
whatever is awarded?
Absolutely.
Okay, there you go. How about that? Could we work on rewording that?
We can reword that. Let's workshop it. How do we do it?
That.
No.
I missed this. Kristie, I'm gonna have you rephrase that in a more legalistic term so that it's a motion that you.
It's not because I cannot give any legal advice here. This is just, I'm a grammar major. So this is grammaring it. Recommending 320, oh, go ahead, sorry, Brian.
Can I ask another clarifying question? I think the intent of your motion, Mike, was that it was up to 329. But if bids came back and we needed 330, we would need to come back to this council.
Got to draw a line in the sand somewhere, so.
And I wanna make sure the council realizes that the timing, like this would, the anticipation is that this would go out to bid soon, like hopefully like next week, if you guys approve it.
Okay.
And then we would get bids back. And I'm not sure if we're anticipating another meeting until fall. Is that?
Well, that's the current schedule for another meeting. This is Doug Martin, but I guess if we needed another meeting.
I'm just trying to think of process wise, if we got, I would hate to have come back 329.5. Would you be willing to consider any wiggling room in your motion?
Yeah, no, I hear you.
That's what I'm asking.
Well, there needs to be because most of the time it comes back needing wiggle room.
This is Kristie Beal, Missoula. If the 329 alleged shortage is based on the engineer's estimate, from my experience, there's already wiggle room in there. And we can't give you an open checkbook on a reserve fund.
How likely is this grant, Mike Baffhouse, Butte, how likely is this grant standing for 100,000 going to be obtained? What would you feel your chances are on that? Because that technically could be our contingency.
You know, wish I could tell you where
Yeah.
the future is. I mean, I would say it's.
Grants in Butte are a sensitive
Well,
subject right now.
not really a grant, you know, the BNRC is a group similar to you guys, except for the Butte accounts, right?
Yeah.
And so it's more of an ask. And it, just like you guys, it's asked for a recommendation. I mean, any movement of money would take an amendment to a restoration plan, and that has to be approved by the trustee and the governor. So I don't have a good feeling for it. You know, we have another employee, Pat Canine, that handled the NRC, and he just recently left us. So from what I understand, maybe it's a 50-50 thing.
Yeah.
He doesn't have it.
Well,
We don't have a quorum, Mike.
we don't have quorum, even though I have proxy of Mick.
Oh, it's proxy admit.
Oh,
Yeah, that was in writing, proxy of Mick Ringsack to me today. Because Mick is away on health concerns.
Just one clarification, we are recommending this funding come from the aquatic contingency, not the reserve.
Fair.
So
yes,
when you're drafting this language, make
Yeah.
sure.
I got it.
So we have, how many of us? We need 5, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay.
These guys.
For those online, we are double checking our quorum head count. We need 5.
So the record is clear. In calculating quorum, we have utilized these entities, folks for, Kristie Beal, Missoula, Steve Hill, Anaconda, Mike Paphausen, Butte, McRingsack, Butte, who, Mike Paphausen has the written proxy for. And can you get that to the NRDP so we have that on the record?
You bet.
Marjorie Christensen, we do not have. Brian Nelson from Deer Lodge, we do not have. Maggie Schmidt from Deer Lodge, we do not have. We have the tribes are here and represented by Chris. And we have EOI represented here by Stephen. No.
No, I'm for Bill Shank.
Okay, so Norm was here. Okay, and so we do not have him. So for a quorum, we would then need 5 out of the 9. We have Kristie Beal, Steve Hill, Mike Paphausen, Mick Ringsack. And the tribes, 5. Yes, sorry. Thank you. So we have a quorum.
Can
Steve.
you entertain a modification?
Please. Let's keep it in discussion and then we'll form a motion.
Okay.
Chris brought up a good point, I think. And early today, we talked a lot about cost benefit. And when Chris asked the question, we got to answer with a checklist. I would like to see, and I understand that there's only 3 drainages that are contributing in the basin to the headwaters of the Silver Bow. And Mike, you had a good, putting that in doing this project, but I would like to see a written cost benefit analysis of what it's going to contribute to Silver Bow. As a contingent to our approval of this motion. That makes sense?
Steve, would you like to see it or approve it?
I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it done.
And then Doug, Mike Paphausen, you here, Doug Martin. Is this procedure of, I mean, it seems like you guys have a fairly homogenized procedure of how you evaluate the criterion of benefits to aquatics, terrestrials, in-stream flow, fish, all the above. Is that outlined in the restoration plan? Was that part of the restoration plan that was approved by this council in 2010? Or is that something that exists internally in NRDP that how you guys evaluate projects and decide on cost benefit analysis? Is that procedure part of the restoration plan?
So our procedure is we're supposed to consider the criteria as we're developing the projects and to the benefit or to meet the goals of the restoration plan. What I was saying earlier, a lot of our discussion and our evaluation is pretty fluid as we're working with the resource managers and that type of thing. We do have a checklist that we are working on or work with that, we can, but it's a pretty rough one. It is not the analysis that Steve wants. I believe that we could put together that analysis that Steve wants. We could put that together, pretty short order.
Steve,
help me out, comment. Just even the fact that through questioning, we found out that this project, the success of this project is dependent on some downstream treatment. Things like that. There are certain risks that are still kind of fluid to ensure the success of this project. And I'd like to see that documented so that when we do pass the motion, we can go back and say, okay, it fails because of this, or it succeeded because all of these things fell into place.
This is Kristie Beal, Missoula. The BAO grant, are they waiting to see what we do here?
No, this is Doug Martin, the Butte Natural Resource Council has a meeting scheduled for next week. They asked the program for projects to move forward on with their remaining funds. They have around $5.6 million. And they asked us for projects. This was one of the projects that we put on that list for them to consider. They have a number of projects. They have well over the similar to what this council dealt with last revision. They have more projects than there is. So,
Kristie Beal, Missoula. Is this project less likely to obtain $100,000 in grant money if we say, if this council approves up to $329,000 out of the aquatic contingency funds, do we reduce the chance that this project will be funded at all by that grant?
This is Doug Martin. I can't speak for the council. I heard Elizabeth was on. She is the chair for that council. I don't know if she could speak to that, but I would suggest, suspect or assume that the fact that there are more projects than there is funding for, that yes, there would be a low likelihood of getting funding if you guys were to propose 329 or whatever was needed.
And Elizabeth is online if we wanted to put her on this.
Chris Stark.
Chris Stark, CSKT. I would like to propose an amendment contingent on them throwing on, this is a Butte fund, right? This is a heart of Butte Creek. A Butte fund that's waffling perhaps on $100,000. I'd like to amend, they throw their $100,000 in, we are much more inclined to give this a positive.
So we don't even have to amend because this is Kristie Beal, Missoula. We're just talking, we're having dialogue right now about a proposed amendment or a proposed motion. Go ahead, Doug Martin.
So Doug Martin, so to clarify on Chris's comment, the Butte Area 1 Restoration Fund is specifically for the area within Butte Area 1. So much like the Upper Clark Fork, there's some latitude of where it can be. There is latitude to move outside of the Butte Area 1 defined area. But as I noted, there are projects within Butte Area 1 that I cannot, and it sounds like Elizabeth wants to talk. But this Blacktail Creek project is an Upper Clark Fork River Basin project. It is within the Upper Clark Fork River Basin that these funds are dedicated to. Not necessarily the fund that not necessarily the area where the Butte Area 1 funds are.
Chris Stark, CSKT, it sounded to me like they were on the edge of giving you the money. And now you're saying maybe they can't do that? Is that what you're trying to say?
This is Doug Martin. It's like, no, they are not on the edge of potentially giving us money. They asked the program for a list of projects. We provided them with a list of restoration projects potentially viable for the Butte Area 1 funding. Associated with that ask, they also asked UCFRB for projects that they had. So as I said, there's a higher number of requests than there is money which is available in Butte Area 1 right now.
Chris Stark, CSKT, that's always the case, isn't it? If you have public money, you throw it on the table, almost always, there's more requests than there are money. In fact, we criticize people in Yukon for, are you kidding me? You didn't go for free money? It's just always always, not always, but damn near always, there's never enough money to do everything we want.
Christie Beal, Missoula. Doug, prioritization of the projects that the NRDP put out in front of the VAO for grant money. How does this project fit in the prioritization of all the other projects that you put in, and how many others were there?
How many other were there? There were, this would not fit, this would not be the highest priority project, or there were several other projects that would be higher priority. And Jim, if you can come up with a number in your head of how many projects there were.
Well, yeah, it depends on how you count them, but there was 7 to 9 projects.
Okay, there was, yes, there were 7 to 9 projects, depending on how, there were a couple projects of Butte Silver Bow that could be split out. So there were, let's say there were 7 projects. This project would probably rank in the bottom half, because there are other higher, there was a very high priority project, at least from the program perspective of working on the parrot, doing dewatering, doing water treatment. It decreased the amount of contaminated water getting to Silver Bow Creek. Butte Silver Bow had additional projects to do some metering, which is, preserving water within Butte. They also have, there's some dedicated dollars to recreation within Butte. They had some projects for that. So I would say it would be on the lower half, but I would have to, that's what the BNRC is going to do next week. They are going to rank these projects. And they're going to rank them and basically, if they want to move forward with projects. So they are going to rank them and then, where the money runs out, that will be the projects that get money.
Christie Beal, Missoula. Are any of these much higher ranking projects that the NRDP put in front of BAO? Would they potentially otherwise be funded by the Aquatics Fund?
No, these are Butte Area 1. So they would be funded by the Butte Area 1.
I guess I'm a little bit conflicted on, this is so important. We have to do this right now. It's so time sensitive. We got to take it out of the contingency fund or the reserve fund. But it's really not that important. It's one of the bottom ones. I don't understand.
I think so. Mike Paffhouse viewed, I think project readiness is the difference as well. That while not a high priority, is there other projects that are as ready as this one that are waiting for this council or out of allocation?
Christie Beal, Missoula, I'm sorry, it hasn't been ready for 10 years.
Right.
Why are we suddenly ready? We got to do this on an emergency basis.
So this is Doug Martin. Christie, one point. There's different priorities for Butte Area 1 than there are for the Upper Clark Fork River Basin aquatic funds.
Understood.
So because it might be a lower priority for the Butte Area 1 and the Butte Council to consider, it is still a high priority for the Upper Clark Fork River Basin aquatic restoration. Butte Area 1 restoration fund has different goals, different priorities than the Upper Clark Fork River Basin.
And let me re-ask the question. Within the Upper Clark Fork River Basin, did NRDP present a project to the VAO that is higher priority than this one?
No.
Mike Paffhouse and you, Doug, do you feel that if we were to throw a sum of money at this project, maybe not 329, but 329 minus, we hope they would throw in that it would become a bigger priority to BAO next week?
I can't answer that, Mike. I'd have to ask Elizabeth.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if she can't answer it either.
Missoula, can you answer that? Will you answer that? Are you there, Elizabeth?
is.
Don't know.
If you are trying to answer, Elizabeth, you are muted. Can you please turn your speaker on? Attorney is probably advised her not to answer.
Mike Paff must mute it. My venture would be is that she would be stuck in a of being the director and not the
Yeah.
representatives of the PNRC. So,
I would assume she would have said then, I can't answer that.
yeah, correct. I think that's fair.
But without the meeting, she probably, you are.
Kristie Beal, there's a little additional just discussion on this. How is the council, the thin forum that we have, feeling about expending up to $229,000 conditioned upon the receipt of the $100,000 BAO grant, but only as the $229,000 is necessary as a result of construction bids?
Great.
Would entertain that? Mike, would you entertain that?
Can you repeat it one more time, please?
How would you feel about this council recommending the expenditure of up to $229,000 contingent upon the NRDP's receipt of a $100,000 BAO grant, and which $229,000 would be reduced dollar for dollar as it was, if, to the extent it was not necessary due to the bid results?
Just to unpack that. Math school, not word school.
This is what got us in trouble the last night, Mike. You were the numbers and I was the numbers. Not in trouble, but it got us a big job.
If that is going to be passed, I think that going to Brian's comments about just having some built-in flexibility to avoid this coming back to this. So I don't think we can afford a lot of flexibility because we can't. But I don't think that $250,000 or $250,000 is out of question, which gives a little bit of wiggle room for this council to move money from the Aquatic Contingency Fund to the Blacktail Creek project contingent on the award of the BNRC to fund the Blacktail Creek project from EAO. And in addition, that this council must prioritize replenishment of the aquatic contingency dollar for dollar at the next allocation.
Kristie Beal, further discussion. My concern with that last part of yours is we don't know what kind of a priority project might be in front of us next time. And we'd have to put the reallocation first. And this, yeah, I just said, that's my concern. Doug Martin?
This Doug Martin, right? 2 comments. I'm gonna answer your, I don't disagree with Kristie's thing there. There will still be there will still be $1 million. In the contingency. So there's still, a good number of amount of money in the contingency. I do think it would be wise if there was, some dollars or available funding that you could add to that contingency. Because there might be another priority, another watershed that, where we had some, one of our struggles is making sure that we are spending the money and not just letting it sit somewhere. Where we got a lot of money sitting in the contingency, that's not helping us. So maybe we do need some flexibility in that to note that, this may be something that we want to reallocate funding to. The other comment I would make is I would propose that your motion not call out the BAO funding, but, say that you're going to fund $250,000. It would be up to,
Alternative funding.
the program and our partners to to get other funding. There are other grants out there. There's grants opening up in the 1st of July that we can put in for to get additional funding to. And I, would recommend that this council not put pressure on another council. Just what they're doing.
That's what they're doing.
No, they're not. We put in, I don't believe they are.
Okay.
I don't believe they are.
Okay.
It was a place that we looked for funding and
And
speculated.
they just happen to have the meeting next week. Yeah.
Well,
Okay, I hear you.
Let's not mention Bill. Steve Hill and let's not forget the cost benefit analysis.
yes,
Yeah.
we will do that regardless of your motion.
So if we are affecting or if we are alleviating the pressure on the $100,000 grant because there are a number of other places where we could get some additional funding potentially, why are we putting pressure on this council to take it from 229 to 250?
I think my background view, my guess would be that there isn't flexibility to change the request for 100,000 for the grant application at this point. We would be the only funding mechanism with that flexibility. Because the grant applications usually are submitted by paper. And Jim, you can tell us, like, when did you submit paperwork to the BAO, NRC to?
Yeah, Jim Ford. So this isn't actually a grant application like there's the 319 was or the future fisheries. That was a big statewide process, very involved. This was just a list. We were asked, Doug described, we were asked for a list of projects. This was added in there. Most of those projects, like their groundwater pumping of contaminated groundwater repaired or other things that go on. So there was no process here. This was just added to a table of a list for projects that were ready to go.
Mike, I'll go, please go.
Go ahead, Mike.
So, I mean, I think it's not unfair to Chris's point that, that we see other project partners contribute, that this fits within the scope and the mission of what they do as well. I don't think that's unfair. So far, I'm not doing my math perfect here, but I think we're sitting at about 560,000 plus a potential of 250 from the contingency. That's what this council would have brought forward. So 570, the original allocation of 531 plus another 250, 780,000 is what we're basically saying that we are happy to contribute to make this project possible. I don't think it's too much for, and again, not to call it any other councils, but any other project partner. We're contributing at a 7-to-1 ratio to help get this done. I think that's a fair amount. And I don't think it's respected to the remaining funds. It's fairly equivalent to how much fund we have versus them. They're about, what you said, about a 10th size what we have. So I do think it's not an unfair ask for alternative funding sources that are available, designated to BAO in the Butte area, to strongly consider a project that we are happy to throw $781,000 at.
Kristie Beal, Missoula. You see, I appreciate what you said, but you went from 229 now up to 250. And all of us have been talking about this and keep forgetting that this is out of an engineer's estimate of $900,000,
Yeah.
which has wiggle room built in to make sure we all talk about this in the highest dollar figure they can possibly get us to talk about it so they can spend the highest dollar figure. I would entertain 229 contingent upon receipt of, I would entertain 229 contingent upon receipt of additional funding that's necessary to pay for the bid from other sources. And I personally will commit, if I'm still on this council, to making sure that repaying the contingency fund, the aquatics contingency fund, would be one of the top priorities of the next funding cycle.
So would it, Mike Bathhouse, would it be in the best interest of this council to, let's call that in good faith, say that we shall work to replenish this contingency fund, or should it be made part of the motion? Because I think, I'm in the insurance business. This is it's a reserve fund. We want to put money into our reserve funds.
Yeah.
We want to tap into it lightly. This council, to my knowledge, I don't think we've ever used reserve or contingency funds for.
No, yeah, the reserve is are separate accounts once the aquatic or terrestrial accounts are exhausted.
Yeah.
That's when you tap in.
Contingency fund is if we're on a project and, oh crap, we didn't know that we were just gonna tap into a
sewer line.
A sewer line, and now we've just contaminated blah, 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 blah. Well, we have $229,000 less now to figure that out, because we spent the contingency on this. It's when there's a project cost that is not anticipated and couldn't reasonably be anticipated.
Correct.
Oftentimes, usually it's the contractor that holds it, and anyway, but this situation is the owner that has it.
Doug, Mike Bathhouse, can you speak to how much interest we're anticipating at the next reallocation? I know it's gonna be an estimation, and I'm asking you to put your max goal on.
Yeah, you might not get it.
I'm just trying to say, like, of the,
Not get your money.
what are we diving into in the next reallocation? That's what we're doing, right? We're diving into the next reallocation right now.
This is Doug Martin. So in general terms, we have the Upper Clark Fork River Restoration Fund gets returns anywhere from 3 to 6%, depending on where we are. The last two allocations we have had in the neighborhood of, $4 million to $6 million to allocate. The fund is getting smaller as we implement projects and do things. So I would say, we would be probably in the neighborhood of, instead of 4 to 6, it would probably be, 4 or slightly less. I know I'm on the record.
No, it's on the record. So just Mike Bathhouse view, just to put it into scale, we're discussing about 5% of the next allocation. That's what we're talking about. So there's a lot of interest on the way. The reason I bring that up is I want to make sure we're all clear that there isn't going to be a chance, very unlikely, that we will be diminishing our returns enough to where we can't replenish the fund. We should have more than enough money to replenish the 229 proposed.
We should, this is Doug Martin again, we should, and, as we move forward with projects and things in the watersheds, we'll also know, whether or not the $1 million that would be left in the contingency fund is going to be sufficient for the projects that are on board at that time.
Okay. I'll simplify the motion. I move that we reallocate no more than $229,000 from the Aquatic Contingency Fund to the Blacktail Creek project. Done.
Does anybody second that?
I don't know if I can proxy second for Mick, but I know that he would. I don't know. I've never ran into that.
Go back to discussion now, if we don't have a second.
We can do it. I do not know the actual.
Yeah.
That deeply.
Having no second, could we go back to discussion? I recognize Steve Hill.
Steve Maniconda, I think if you put the replenishment of the contingency fund in the motion, I would second that.
Okay. Do you want a priority in that or just that it's required?
Required.
Okay, so, I move we reallocate no more than $229,000 from the Aquatic Contingency Fund to the Blacktail Creek project as proposed. I lost my place. Say it again,
With the requirement.
with the requirement that,
The
An extra allocation.
yep,
Contingency
with the
fund.
requirement that at the next reallocation, the contingent, aquatic contingency is replenished.
With-
Is however.
Yeah.
Because there's multiple ways for us to move that.
in the amount.
In the amount.
The amount.
Could we add, Mike, in the amount of the
Correct.
expenditure?
In the amount of the expenditure, not 229, whatever it costs us.
Yeah.
Okay, just so that I have it correctly. I don't have it word for word, but just so that we have it stated,
Yeah, please.
make sure.
Read it back.
The motion is that this council recommend expenditure out of the aquatic contingency fund of up to $229,000 for the Blacktail project with the requirement that at the next reallocation, this council would replenish the aquatic contingency fund in the amount utilized for this expenditure.
I will make that my motion.
All in favor, say aye. Oh, wait, discussion. You have to have discussion again. Discussion, public comment. Sorry,
Revenue.
Chris.
Quick question of we're gonna get this cost benefit correct story soon. Does that have any bearing on what we're doing with this motion? No.
I think because of the timing,
Okay.
I think I would agree with your assessment, but I agree, I would still like to see it too.
Like Bathhouse and Butte, I do also want to see it, but I also put a lot of trust in those who are telling us in good faith that, in their careers or this job, that they know what they're doing.
Chris Stark, CSKT, is a retired fish biologist. I challenge that because fish biologists have lots of really great, awesome thoughts about what we could do. The Clark Fork as it is now, it's a great example of what we thought. It's going downhill still. So much as we like to think that we got somebody back, we're pretty commonly wrong.
All right,
We just don't know it. It's science.
Christie Beal, any additional discussion from the council? Open discussion from the public? Do we have anybody online? We do not have anybody online. We do not have anybody present here. So do we need the motion? Where did Valerie go? Okay. Do we need a rereading of the motion or are we ready to vote? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Two for me.
No opposed. Motion passes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for your work on that. Thank you for your calculations on that, Mike. Thank you, NRDP, for all your work on this. And we'll have to talk right now if we're going on field trip. All right, motion or meeting adjourned.
All right.
Yes.
Wrong.
You should have. So I shorthand things.